Welcome, everybody. Hello. Looks like we got a wee bit excitement over pollinators and pollinator habitat. Yay! How many of y'all are here for the first time? Okay, all right. My name is Debbie Roos, and I'm the Sustainable Agriculture Agent here in Chatham County. So I'm welcoming you to our county. We think we have a great program set up for y'all today. Just wanted to make sure everyone knew where the bathrooms were. That tends to be important. You can go out that door, or out the back. Men's is over there, women's here. We are going to give y'all a break about halfway through the program. You're going to get a 10-minute break. We are recording this. There's no live Zoom, so that I actually had to cut people off. We had 400 people register. Yeah, so people who weren't able to attend or the whole wide world, we're going to send it out to, can watch the recording. So we're monitoring that as well. So y'all will get a link. Tonight, I'm going to send y'all a link. We want you to fill out an evaluation for the program. And that's also going to tell us what other programs you would like. Does that sound good? Because I've been doing pollinator habitat programs here in the county for about 20 years, but we always want to know what other, things related to pollinator habitat you'd like to see. And I'll send you any of the resources that are mentioned in the publication. I'll send you direct links to those. So that's about all I wanted to say. I'm really excited to have y'all here. We got a lot of speakers, really great team here. So I'm going to pass it off to Hannah.
Okay, thank you everyone. This is an amazing turnout. Hopefully you're all excited to learn about creating diverse habitat for pollinators and other beneficial insects. So first, just to get us started, I want to go ahead and share with you the schedule that we're expecting today. We are going 2 to 5. I'm going to try to keep us really on time. We will see how that goes. But we'll introduce you about why we're all here today. We're going to talk about some native bees. We'll talk about non-bee neighbors that are going to be in this habitat that you will hopefully plant after our workshop today. We'll give you some advice about selecting plant species for beneficial insects and a recommended pollinator habitat layout and species list. That is the big point of today, and I'll get into more details about that in a second. We'll also talk about where to source plants. That's a big topic. And then we'll have the break that Debbie talked about. We'll go over some installation guidelines, maintenance recommendations. We'll have some farmer experience, and I'll give you some more details about what that means in a second. And then we'll talk about habitat establishment and insect visitation. And then hopefully we left plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm sure many of you have questions. Because we saved that time for questions at the end, save your questions for the end. We have a lot of rotating speakers. We want to keep ourselves on track, so save those questions for the end. We will not take questions while the speakers are up here. Quickly, I want to introduce our team. So we had 3 different institutions working together on this. We had North Carolina State University, North Carolina Cooperative Extension, and the North Carolina Botanical Garden. So from NC State University, we had Angel Cruz and myself. I'm a research scholar in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology at NC State. Angel could not be here today. From Cooperative Extension, we have Debbie Roos, who you just met, and probably many of you love and know already. Yeah, let's do that. Then from the Botanical Garden, today we have Daniel Stern, who is the Director of Horticulture. He is in the back. He will be a speaker today. Becca Waite, Horticulture Curator, also a speaker today in the back. Allie could not be with us today, but she's a conservation grower for the Botanical Garden. Shakita Holloway, our horticultural technician with the Botanical Garden, also in the back, will speak today. And then Michael Kuntz, who could not be here today, Director of Conservation Programs. So that is our team across the 3 institutions. I also want to give a special thanks to some people that contributed to this project. I want to thank Joanna Lelikax, who really got this started. She is the reason that we're here today. I also want to thank Bradley Metz, Joseph Guillemette, Lucy Ciccone, Bobby Rose, Ollie Goodman, and Lauren Todd, who helped get this project going and collect some of the data we'll talk about today. I also want to introduce our team, our grower cooperators. We did work with 3 growers in North Carolina. We have Howard Allen from Faithful Farms, Meredith Leith from Granite Spring Farm, and Connie and Millard Locklear from Newgrounds Farm, and we'll hear from them later. And then the last thanks before we get started, I promise, is I want to thank the funders for this work. So this work was largely funded by Southern SARE, which is a program under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We also got some additional funding from another institution under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I want to thank the U.S. Department of Agriculture in general, but also SARE for funding this project. That is why this is possible today. So the reason we're here today, I think it's pretty obvious that in North Carolina, I think we've really created a culture that cares a lot about native plants, protecting the plants in our state, protecting the pollinators in our state. There's a lot of interest, right? And so we do a lot of work, all of these institutions, about we need to preserve the habitat, we need to put out more habitat. But we actually were receiving some feedback from people that they wanted more information. So to give you an idea of numbers, in 2023, we surveyed 200 growers in North Carolina and some surrounding states. And we asked them if you're interested in installing pollinator habitat on your farm, or if you're not a farmer, just think about your own property, but you haven't yet. Why is that? We want to know what is missing. 35% of them told us that they just felt like they needed more help. They didn't know where to start. They were maybe a little intimidated. Maybe some of you also feel that way. You're not exactly sure where to start. More specifically, people wanted more information about the habitat, including installation. How do we maintain it? What plants do I even use? Basically, everything we're going over today. And so because we got that feedback, we asked for funding from those institutions I just introduced to you. And we said, this is what the public in North Carolina needs. This is what they're asking us, and we want to be able to address this. So that led to this research project so that we could provide this information to you all. So what that project involved is 3 objectives. The first objective was we wanted to create guidelines from start to finish on how someone could create habitat. So that was our objective 1. We came up with a design and basically guidelines. We then installed it on 3 farms in 3 different counties. You can see in that map there. We wanted to make sure that what we were thinking made sense actually made sense out in the ground. You know, sometimes things just don't go as planned when you get out there. So we wanted to actually make sure that it was good on the follow through, basically. So we planted it on those 3 farms, and then we went back and documented the installation, how well those plants established, and what insects visited those plants. Do we think that the pollinators we want to support are actually being supported by this habitat that we're going to tell all of you to install? And then the third objective was, once we did all of that, we needed to share that information and what we learned. And that's holding a workshop, and that's today. So thank you for helping us fulfill the last objective of our grant. So that's great. Okay, last thing before we get into some of the content is I want to go over just some general understandings for today. So first of all, I want to say there's a lot of information about this topic, about plants, what plants to plant, pollinators that are out there. There's a lot of information, and there are a lot of ways to do things. You might hear us recommend something today that's not exactly what you do. That's okay. Remember, the goal of this was some people didn't know where to start. We just want to give people those tools. We want to give them a way to start. And after that, use this as a starting point. We don't want you to feel overwhelmed, but you can go beyond what we're talking about today. We just want to help you get some plants in the ground. So keep adding and modifying beyond what you hear today, but beyond what you learn today. This is just the start. And then the other thing I really want to highlight is that this is going to require maintenance. This is not something that you put in the ground and then walk away. You need to maintain it to make sure that the right plants that you want are in there and that it's providing the benefits to the pollinator community that we think it will. So just keep that in mind. And some of you smiled. I'm sure you already know what I'm saying, but just in case. And then we do have, hours of content today. It's going to be a lot of information. We did create this handout, which should be a pretty nice summary of what we're talking about today. The information in the different presenters that we have today represent different sections in this guideline or this handout for guidance. So you can refer back to this. Hopefully after today, it will help re-jog your memory. So don't feel like you need to remember everything that we talk about. Okay, and with that, let me try to stay on track and remember that we started 5 minutes late. Okay, so now we'll get into the content for today. So we are all here talking about pollinator habitat. We wanted to start out by saying, who is that in the landscape? Who is this habitat going to help? There's a lot of different insects. We will talk about some non-bees in a second, but bees are one of the keystone pollinators in our ecosystems. And so we wanted to give a moment to really focus on bees. So I'll start with talking about the who, what, and how of native bees of North Carolina. And what I mean by that is by who, we want to think, what are the bees that are out there? Who are they? What species are we talking about? What do those bees need in the landscape for us to support them? And how can we do that? So that's the who, the what, and the how. So I hopefully don't have to convince any of you you're here today that bees are very important, but we'll start there just so we all are starting at the same place. So bees are a really diverse group of insects. You can see here how different they can look from each other. And they are our essential pollinators in our ecosystems. So just as an example, what I mean by that is bees are important for pollination. So the majority of wild flowering plants, about 89%, require pollination. The majority of that does come from bees. And about 75% of all of our crops in the world also need pollination. Again, the majority of that comes from bees. So both our natural landscapes, our natural ecosystems, and the food that we eat does need pollination and relies on bees. It's very important. This image shows you a breakfast with bees and a breakfast without bees. I do want to note something that's gone around a lot. You might have heard thank a bee for 1/3 of all the food you eat. That's not quite it. You know, it's been mistranslated through a worldwide game of telephone. You can see these two photos, there's still food on the plate, right? In the photo with bees, we have fruits, vegetables, a lot of the fun food, a lot of the very nutritious food. On the other plate, we have things that don't need bee pollination, maybe wind pollination, things that don't need pollination. So we would eat, but that's not a very fun breakfast plate, and we would also have a lot of nutritional deficiencies. So for our health and for us to have food that's good and we enjoy, we do need to protect bees and their pollination services. Now, when we're talking about bees and who's doing that pollination, when we're thinking about agriculture, the majority of that is coming from honeybees. Anywhere from 50 to 80% of crop pollination is provided by honeybees. They're a really important species for our agricultural systems. But we don't need to rely on just one species. There are many species, we'll go into that more in a second, of wild bees, of native bees that also contribute to crop pollination. But those wild and native bees are also extremely important for those wild flowering plants that we talked about. So we don't need to just think about how do we protect bees. We need to think about how do we protect as many species of bees as possible. As an example, I want to talk to you about strawberry pollination. So for a strawberry to be properly pollinated, let me see if I can step around. We need every little pistil on the middle of this flower to be touched and pollinated. That gives us this nice round fruit here, very symmetrical, looks really nice. For example, if a honeybee is pollinating a strawberry, it might stay only in the center of that flower. That could give us a deformed fruit where only the center is pollinated, but not the outside. For example, our small native bees would travel around the outside of the fruit rather than the middle. That gives us a different deformity, right? Where the middle was not pollinated properly. When we have multiple species, a diversity in the ecosystem, they're all behaving different and interacting different with the flowers, we get the best pollination. So again, just making the point, it's not just let's protect a bee. We want to protect as many different bees. We need diversity in our ecosystem. So I did mention there's other insects other than bees that are important pollinators. We will go into them a little bit more in a minute, but here's just an example of the different insects that can contribute to pollination. But bees are considered a keystone species because they are the only insect that as adult and larva are eating pollen and nectar. So they are collecting large amounts of pollen. You can see this bumblebee is covered with pollen right here. So they are the most efficient pollinators, and that's why they're important when we're thinking about pollination. Okay, so I want to get back to the diversity of bees. So bees come in a lot of different shapes, sizes, colors. They live differently from each other. To give you an idea, there are 564 different species of bees just in North Carolina. There are more than 4,000 different species in North America and more than 20,000 in the world. And each of these bees could play a different role in the ecosystem. They could interact with plants differently. So that's why it's really important that we think about diversity when we're thinking about protecting bees. I want to quickly go through some biology just to give you a sense of this diversity. When we're thinking about any living thing, even us, they really need two main things to survive: food and shelter. For bees, food is flowers, where they get some resources I'll talk about in a second, and shelter is where they build their nests to lay eggs for the next generation. So for food, bees need pollen and nectar. So we want flowers in the landscape that produce both of these resources. Not all flowers do. Pollen is where they get their source of protein, their amino acids, some very important nutrients, and nectar is their main source of carbohydrates. So both of them are very important. Once bees get that food, they all go through the same general life cycle. So I wanted to walk you through that really quickly. So we have a female bee is foraging, collecting pollen and nectar. She then goes to her nest. She puts a provision or a pollen ball of that pollen and nectar in the nest and lays an egg on it. That is the food that that egg has to eat for the rest of its development. It hatches into a larva, then into a pupa, then it emerges fully grown as an adult. Then the males and females will mate, the females will start foraging again and start the whole cycle over again. Depending on the species, they all do this cycle, but depending on the species, it could take anywhere from a month to a year or more to complete. So that already tells you how different species could be acting in the landscape and how different their resource needs might be. So I will quickly go through some more distinctions. That's kind of how bees are similar. Now I'll talk about all the differences there are. I'll talk about size, where they live, how they live, and what they eat. So for size, just to give you a sense, the smallest bee in the world, Perdina minima, is 0.08 inches, so very tiny, compared to the largest bee in the world, Megachile pluto, which is 2.5 inches. And there's any size in between, right, depending on the species. So that small bee is going to visit different flowers. It's going to do a different role in the ecosystem than the largest bee in the world. Where bees live can be broadly grouped into four main materials. We have soil, wood, stems and twigs, and cavity nesters. So soil nesters, they will build tunnels underground. You may not even notice that they're there. 70% of all bee species live underground. We don't even notice that they're there most of the time. We have wood nesters, which could be sound dead wood or rotting softwood, depending on the species. We have twig and stem nesters. Those are our leafcutter bees, our mason bees. Those are what you're seeing going to bee hotels. And then cavity nesters are our honeybees and our bumblebees. They take a space, an open space, and then build their nest to fill that space. So I'll make a note that our cavity nesters, honeybees and bumblebees, we probably know the most about them, right? Everyone knows about honeybees and bumblebees. Less than 1% of all of the 20,000 bee species in the world build nests that way, where we have 70% of all bee species nesting underground and we might not even notice that they're there. So there's still so much we need to learn. It's really hard to study these ground nesters compared to a very unique set of species that we know much more about. So there's a lot more that we need to learn. Within those nests, they can be pretty different as well. So this is a big gradient for time. I'm just talking about the two extremes. There's lots in the middle that I'm skipping over. But on one extreme, we have solitary bees. That's where an individual female builds her own nest, lays her own eggs, collects her own food. She does everything on her own. She does not get help from any other adult bees. Way opposite side of the spectrum, we have highly eusocial species, think honeybees. There could be tens of thousands of adult bees living together, working together. Some of them collect food, some of them build the nest. They're not all doing the same thing, so they're much more efficient. They also have cooperative brood care. They have overlapping generations, so there's bees of all different ages in those nests at the same time. And then they live on a perennial life cycle. So those nests, those same nests, last year after year after year, where our solitary species are usually on an annual life cycle. They're only living for a few months, probably not the whole year even. And again, I want to note that we know a lot about honeybees, right? Less than 5% of species worldwide live this way. So we know a lot about them, but they're very unique. And the things we know about them may not apply to these other species. 90% of all bee species are solitary. So again, just making the point that we have a lot more to learn so that we can appropriately support all these different species, because these play different roles in the landscape and they need different resources. Then we have what bees eat. So again, a spectrum, I'm just talking about the two extremes. We have specialist pollinators where they have a relationship with a single family, genus, or maybe even species of plant. The example here is a squash bee and a squash flower. They then need to collect the pollen from that specific plant to successfully raise their young. Otherwise, they cannot successfully raise their young. Many times this also means that those plants need that specific bee species to successfully pollinate them. The other side, we have generalist pollinators, where if a plant produces pollen or nectar, they can probably collect those resources from those flowers, feed it to their young, and be okay. The caveat here is that typically generalist pollinators then need many different types of flowers to get all of the nutrients that they need in their diet. So there's a trade-off. The other thing about what they eat is not all bees are best suited to all flower types. And I'll really quickly give you some examples here for time, but for example, there's short-tongued and long-tongued bees. A short-tongued bee may not be able to collect nectar from all of the same flowers, right? So we need to think about how bees and flowers match up. It's not just here's a bee and here's a flower. Size and strength, for example, hopefully you can see that little video playing. That's an example of a bumblebee. It's buzzing at a very specific frequency to release the pollen from a tomato flower. Bumblebees are also very large and strong, and they can do this. Not all species can buzz at that frequency. They can't pollinate tomato flowers otherwise. So just showing you the matchup really matters. So all of this is to say that it's really important that we consider how different species are different when we're making land management decisions. What works for one species might not work for another, or may not, it may just be neutral, it could even be detrimental. So we really need to be mindful when we're thinking about all these different flowers, all these different bees, how do they match up? I wanted to quickly touch on stressors that bees are facing. So there's a lot going on at once. It's really like death of a thousand cuts. There's not one thing that we can point at. But here's a handful of things that we know are causing problems. So there is nutritional problems. Climate change has a whole suite of problems that it can cause. Habitat loss, parasites and pathogens. Bees do get sick, and that's a problem for us. And then pesticide exposure. And these stressors aren't working independently, right? They can build on each other. So as an example, let's say there's a big habitat loss in an area, the flowers are removed. Maybe the bees then aren't getting the nutrition they need. Maybe then they get sicker than they would otherwise. So you can see how it starts to build and spiral. Now, some of these things an individual person can't really address, right? Like I can't go out tomorrow and fix climate change. So that's tough. We need to work together. But there is one stressor that we have evidence that an individual person can go out, do something about, and have an impact, and that is habitat loss. We can add habitat back into the landscape, and we can immediately see benefits from doing that. So just as some examples, some research in North Carolina and outside of North Carolina showing that when we put habitat back in the landscape, we see the number of bees in an area increase. We see the number of different species of bees in an area increase. We also see crop yield increase. There's also a lot of other benefits like soil retention, soil quality, water quality. There's a whole suite of benefits that happen when we put habitat out into the environment. Within a year or two, we see these benefits. So that is why there's a lot of focus on putting habitat back into the landscape. It is something that we can do and we can make a difference in a very short amount of time. I want to make the note that when we think about habitat, a lot of times it's really quick and easy to think about food, the flowers, the pollen and nectar. But we did talk about how important all the nesting was and all the different types of nesting materials. So we do also want to keep in mind that when we're thinking about habitat loss, that also means the nesting materials. We need to make sure those are in the landscape. Okay, so I think we're okay on time. I'm going to quickly talk about non-bee neighbors in the garden that we might also want to think about. And I'll start with some terminology just to make sure we're all on the same page. You might hear these throughout the day. So the first one is beneficial organism. What I mean by that is an animal that provides an ecosystem service. There's lots of different things that are considered ecosystem service. To narrow our focus, for today we're talking about insects. And when we're thinking about insects, those ecosystem services we're talking about are pollination. We're talking about that already. Pest control, decomposition, nutrient cycling and soil health, and as a food source for other organisms. That's also important to realize. We're supporting pollinators. You might see birds come in and eat your pollinators, but you're contributing to the overall ecosystem with that. So we talked about pollination. The other thing we're going to talk about today is pest control. So pest control, there's a lot of what are called natural enemies that are going to be supported in your gardens. And I want you to know what you might see before you plant that garden. So that could include predators. Those are animals that attack and consume prey. They're killing pest species by eating them. I'll give you some examples of what a predator might be in your garden. There's also parasitoids. That's where the immature life stage of that animal is developing on or inside another organism, and that kills the pest as well. So there's multiple ways that there could be a natural enemy killing pests, and I'll give you some examples. And for parasitoids, I want to note that it's not a parasite. Those are things that feed on an organism and don't kill them. So it is different, and those words are similar. So I just want to point that out. So other pollinators you'll see in your garden, butterflies and moths, for example. So they are visiting flowers to drink the nectar. While they're on those flowers, they will get pollen on their body and they will go to the next flower and transfer those pollen grains, and they're contributing to pollination. But they're not collecting pollen in large amounts like we've talked about with bees. So the pollination efficiency is a little different, excuse me. They do have this long proboscis that they're drinking nectar with, and that will get pollen on it as well as their legs. The other thing to keep in mind is when we're successfully supporting moths and butterflies in your garden, that means you should see the immatures and they should be eating the leaves in your garden. So don't be worried when you see that. That means you're doing a good job. And it's fun to learn what the immatures look like compared to the adults because they will be very different looking. Okay, we also have hoverflies, flower flies, and others. So here's just a mix of photos to show you how different these flies can look in your garden. So again, they're drinking the nectar, they get pollen on their body, that's how they're contributing to pollination. But there's also organisms, and flies are a great example, that provide multiple ecosystem services. So many of these fly larvae are providing really important decomposition services in the soil. So you're supporting multiple things at once by giving the nectar resource to the adults. Beetles, very similar thing. The adults are there to drink the nectar. They may also eat the pollen. Their larvae are also contributing to decomposition, or sometimes even they're eating pests, so they're a predator as well. Then we have wasps and parasitoids. So thinking about predators, the wasps are collecting pest species out of your garden. They're grabbing caterpillars, they're feeding that to their young in their nest. And the parasitoids are the ones that are laying their eggs on pest species, and that then kills the pest. So you can see some examples there. There's going to be some other insects that are predators in your garden. You may see praying mantis, robber flies, assassin bugs, just as a few examples. There are many others we're not talking about today. With these predators, I want to highlight that you, again, with the butterflies, look for the immatures. There's going to be immatures that look very differently than these predators. So one example I want to show you, lady beetles, this is their larva. It looks pretty different and scary, but that is eating your aphids. And then lacewings, also the immatures are really important predators in the garden. And then we also have some non-insects that you may see. Maybe you'll see some vertebrates like anoles. This is an example here from Debbie's garden. And then there's going to be lots of spiders, but spiders are great for eating our pesty things. So we want to support spiders as well. Okay, and with that, our next speaker is going to be Debbie. Now that we know about who we're supporting, we're going to talk about how we select the plants that are going to be supporting those organisms.
Dan, you can hear me. Okay, great. Hello, everybody. I'm back. That was great, Hannah. Appreciated hearing all about that. And we'll see a little bit of overlap here because her talk leads directly into mine, which just keeps on going. So what we're hoping, everyone aspires to have is that high quality habitat that supports all the beneficials, as Hannah was talking about, including pollinators and natural enemies and others that provide ecosystem services. This is a picture of one of the project sites at Granite Springs Farm here in Chatham County. So that was the very first year of this habitat. So Meredith elected to put hers right in the middle of a field with some surrounding crops on either side. I want to talk about just general guidelines for attracting beneficials. It's important to have flowers that have a different color, shape, and size. Again, as Hannah was saying, that helps accommodate all the many, thousands of species of pollinators and other critters out there. Because she talked about, bees having different tongue lengths, and body sizes, and that is what affects their ability to, grab resources from any particular plant. So by that, this is just showing you a little bit of the diversity. You can see tubular flowers in there, like the penstemon and baptisia, skullcap. You've got some composite flowers where you've got the center. Think of like a cone flower where the center is actually many different flowers. Those are the disc flowers. So That helps attract, some of those flowers are very shallow, so that helps the short-tongue species access that nectar. Speaking of that, we have, just some examples of, who are short-tongued pollinators. That could include certainly the syrphid flies. And if you're growing any kind of crop, it's great to be able to attract syrphid flies or hoverflies, flower flies, all similar, because their larvae are aphid predators. So they really can help control that pest on your farm or garden. This is a native climbing aster vine. Most wasps tend to have short tongues as well, certainly shorter than bees. So they love being able to access those more shallow, tiny, smaller flowers. And then you have some examples of our long-tongued pollinators, of course, would include the lepidopterans, skippers and moths and butterflies, like this clouded skipper. And bumblebees are known for having fairly long tongues. But we have 15 species of bumblebees in North Carolina. So even among those bumblebees, they're going to vary a little bit. But in general, longer tongues. I like that picture of the bumblebee. There's a protective sheath that goes down either side of the tongue, and they can really get in there. And then you have size. We're talking about body size and strength. So this is the small carpenter bee. We have several species of Serratina. Most people are not aware. They think carpenter bees are all the big one. But we have small species as well, and they're able to chew just like the larger species. So they need, again, those composite flowers with the very tiny disc flowers. And there's no scale here on the second picture, but that little figwort flower is so tiny. And the bee is even tinier. So I like to see them, they go in and turn around and kind of guard it, I guess. You're not coming in here. This is another species of syrphid fly that's very, very small because they also range in size. Many of them are bee and wasp mimics. They look like hornets, and they're actually about that size, Mylesia virginica. But some are very, very tiny like these. And then you have your big, your larger size pollinators like bumblebees that have the size and the strength to push their way open, to push a flower open and access what they need to get. And then another example of a big pollinator, of course, is the giant swallowtail. Anybody seen a giant swallowtail butterfly? It's the largest butterfly in the United States. We have them here in Chatham County and scattered throughout the state. They're quite striking. The larvae are on the left. I'll never forget my first time meeting one, I guess you could say. A grower called me and said that something was defoliating her Meyer lemon trees. And she said this really ugly, weird looking caterpillar. And I was like, oh, I want to come over. And it was definitely my first caterpillar rescue. Because obviously she didn't want them defoliating her lemon tree, but I knew that it was the larvae. They're called orange dogs in Florida because they really feed on the citrus as a host. They're considered pests, but with the help of a neighbor who had some of the host plants, we relocated them. But that's a gorgeous butterfly. So again, continuing with the general guidelines for plant selection, we encourage people to emphasize native plants. They generally support more wildlife. That's been, backed up by research. And I'm saying generally, there's always exceptions, but especially when it comes to acting as host plants for caterpillars. Most caterpillars don't feed on these exotic plants. They haven't evolved alongside of them to overcome their defenses. And it's nice to aim for having at least 3 to 5 species blooming each season. That is not hard to do. That's just a minimum. So here's a little syrphid fly enjoying the blooms of beautyberry that produces those beautiful purple berries in the fall. So just showing you, the diversity here. I know I work with a lot of beekeepers as well, and I was a beekeeper for a short while, more of a bee haver, but they always refer to the summer period as a dearth period of bloom. And I like to argue it doesn't have to be, because I can have 60 different species blooming in the dead of summer in the demonstration pollinator garden. But there's a lot of things to choose from as far as plants for each season. You also want to try to provide host plants for butterflies. This is a Heliopsis on the left, which is an oxeye daisy. So that supports the silvery checker spot. And of course, hopefully most of y'all have seen the spicebush caterpillar. The spicebush is one of the hosts for the spicebush swallowtail, one of my very favorite caterpillars. Other examples would be your milkweeds. Your butterfly weed is a milkweed, of course. This is a monarch actually laying eggs on the plant. And there's the outcome. Last year was one of the best years in our pollinator garden here for monarch caterpillars. Later in the season, I have never seen so many. It was amazing. Another great plant is the native pussy toes, which is a ground cover, very unique flower. And it's a host plant for the American lady butterfly. You may be more familiar with painted lady, but American lady is more common around here. But you see in the bottom right picture, they roll up the leaves. They spin kind of a web and roll the leaves up and hide out inside. So you actually rarely see the caterpillar, but they're there and they're relying on those native ground covers or native plants. So for pollinators in general, of course, they're going to need, as Hannah said, nectar and pollen. They also need access to overwintering sites, nesting and overwintering sites, and protection from pesticides, just reinforcing what Hannah said. And they need these resources in general, spring to fall. And, some of the species like bumblebee queens will overwinter, so they need those places, to do that. This is a mining bee. I love that. The body is completely covered in pollen on this viburnum. And natural enemies, very similar needs. I basically just added insect prey. And that's why as farmers and gardeners, we never want to eradicate pests. You need some, right? You need them to support your beneficials. You just don't want so many that it causes yield loss. But otherwise, they need the same things. This is a nymph, an anchor bug nymph that's feeding on a milkweed beetle larva on milkweed. And these examples of nesting and overwintering sites, on the left is a mining bee colony, not colony, they're social bees, but aggregation of solitary bee nests where they tunnel underground. This is at the Chapel Hill Library. And they love having a slope and it's barely covered in grass. And they come back every year. And I remember the first year they had them, I got a call from the Orange County beekeepers because generally when people see hundreds of bees hovering over grass, they get very nervous. And I've talked to more people than I'd like to admit that have poured gasoline down the holes in an attempt to try to kill them, which is why I wrote an article about ground nesting bees. But, as Hannah said, about 70% of our bees are ground nesters. So in North Carolina, that's about 400 species. And they do a lot of work, very important early pollination work, like these mining bees. We're going to start seeing them. We see them already have started nesting. But this is the colony at the Chapel Hill Library. I went out there and, talked to them about it. And then they made it an educational thing with signs. And it's great. As long as people know they're not going to sting you, but they come back every year to that slope. And then let's see, on the right are examples of hollow stems from rattlesnake master. So that would be for cavity nesting bees like mason bees and leafcutter bees. On the bottom left is a rock pile that we built at the Pollinator Garden with my friend and volunteer Paul Savina right here. So the idea for that is to also provide, it would be actually a wonderful place for bumblebees to nest because we put a lot of things in the basement. Perfect cavity for bumblebees. And then our native grasses, our bunch grasses are great for overwintering and even for like bumblebee nests, you'll often see at the base of grasses. And then the other picture is just of leaf litter, which is important to leave. Leave the leaves, right? Right, Barbara Driscoll? Okay, so now specifically we're talking about plant species for our SARE project. We thought long and hard about this with a great team here that I loved working with. So many choices, but we narrowed it down. We wanted to make it manageable, so we narrowed it down to 15 species of native perennials. Again, that's going to offer resources from early spring to late fall. That's very important. And those blooms, we made sure that they offered that diversity of size, shape, and color. But one thing I'd like to say at the top here. So when you look at your list of plants. If you have a hard time finding those, don't fret. There's many similar plants. I'll give you an example. At my demo pollinator garden in Pittsburgh, I have 12 different species of native aster. I have 12 different species of native goldenrod, multiple species of liatris and ironweed, all the plants we're going to talk about here. I can't tell you any great difference between one and the other as far as pollinators. So if you can't find the exact one we're mentioning, get another Vernonia or ironweed, And I think it's going to give you what you need. So don't worry too much about that. So some of our spring blooming plants, it's always good to have milkweed, butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa is really great for hot and dry sites. And that's the bright orange one. You'll see lots of monarchs on any of course, any of the milkweeds. As I mentioned, super drought tolerant more so than others. And the milkweeds are going to naturally be pretty deer resistant. So like we have it listed as a spring bloomer, but it will bloom into the summer. Some other examples of the visitors that you might see on butterfly weed, lots of different butterflies. The bumbles love it, honeybees love it. You'll find predators like this ambush bug hiding out in it. The anoles love it, the Carolina anoles. And again, I keep saying like Hannah said, but she was the first speaker, so I'm following her, but I want to reinforce that. I don't get upset when I see predators eating my beloved pollinators. It's all part of the food system, the food web. What I don't like is seeing non-native predators eating pollinators like Chinese praying mantis. So, we try to control those. But otherwise, everybody has to eat. Another species is Baptisia. Baptisia is super important for those early emerging bumblebee queens. And it's definitely one of my all-time favorites. Interestingly, though, I've only ever seen two groups of bees on it, bumblebees and leafcutter bees. But it's so important to those species, and it provides a lot of resources for them. And it's just a gorgeous plant. Again, I have more than one species, but they're also nitrogen fixing. It will also bloom into summer. One of the other species might bloom a little later in the spring, like Baptisia alba is a white one. So that's also one that's good. But again, some of the visitors, you can see the leafcutter bees. They have their scopa or branched hairs on the underside of their abdomen. So that's why they're bright yellow. Some people describe it as a flying Cheeto. And I love the one on the right. The bumblebees don't have concentrated scopa in a certain area. They put their pollen in the pollen baskets. And this bumblebee looks like she's sitting on two very fat pillows. That's all pollen that she's getting from the Baptisia. And the next one we're going to talk about is purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea. It is a real workhorse. It will bloom even into the fall, not the display you get in the spring, but it will bloom intermittently through the fall. There's different species. Purpurea is the real workhorse one, provides medicinal value as well. It's grown by, a lot of growers for that. Yeah, and it's also a nesting resource. So I have a resource on my website that shows like which plant stems are hollow and which are pithy. Hollow stems are great for most cavity nesting bees. The pithy stems are only going to be an option for the carpenter bees that can chew for the most part, but the pithy means it's soft and it's got a soft center, so they're able to, so any bee that can chew can make a nest out of a pithy stem, and that includes Echinacea here. So here's just another, the American lady I mentioned earlier, and the bumblebee. So an example, I don't think I'm tied to anything here. The example of the coneflower. So these are the disc flowers, and you can see the bees will go and work each one individually until you can see those anthers with the pollen. They're opening up each flower, and they usually mature from the outside in. But just so many different pollinators love, the coneflowers. Another real workhorse, and this will literally bloom spring to fall. If you deadhead it, that helps it. Deadheading is removing the spent blooms. And by doing that, you redirect the plant's energy from making seed into producing more flowers. Now, on a huge scale, you may not be able to deadhead. I get that. But if you're able to, it can keep it blooming longer. Also very, very drought tolerant. This is Gaillardia pulchella, blanket flower, sometimes called Indian blanket. Really great plant. It loves the heat. I even have some in my demo garden that's bordering asphalt and sidewalk, and the hottest 100-degree day, it's just like, bring it on, doesn't bother it at all. And I'm really paying attention to how plants react to extreme heat. The demo garden is a lot of the beds are in a parking lot. So it's really showing me who's going to be able to survive climate change, I guess. This is two different species here. The purple is a variety of Gaillardia estavelis. And then there's the pulchella there, but again, many, many different bee visitors. All right, so now we're moving into the summer blooming plants. I love this plant. It's called white bee balm, basil bee balm. One of the Monardas, Monarda clinopodia, is just gorgeous. And of course, any of these aromatic plants are going to be deer resistant for the most part. It also provides a nesting resource. The Monardas are in the mint family. They have a square stem and usually hollow. So that's a nice cavity for bees. Not always hollow. The Monarda punctata is more of a pithy stem. But look at the difference in the size of these bees here. So that's a bumblebee on the left. And at the very, very top of you can see the little anthers. Well, that gives you a little bit of the idea of the scale on the picture on the right. That's the most tiny sweat bee, just the tiniest little thing. But the flowers are just gorgeous. It's a great plant to have. And then the Monarda fistulosa, another, all these are workhorses. That's why we have them on, on the list. Again, deer resistant, a nesting resource with that hollow square stem, and lots of different visitors, bumblebees and, butterflies, hummingbirds as well, of course. And here's just a big plot of it mixed with coneflowers. And now the mountain mints is one of my all-time favorites. So I have, I think, 8 or 10 different species of native mountain mint in the pollinator garden. We're featuring a narrowleaf mountain mint, which is Pycnanthemum tenuifolium. It blooms forever, no maintenance required at all, deer resistant. Again, that nesting resource. So, I always joke if someone had a gun to my head and made me pick top 10, because I have a top 25, this would definitely be on that. Yep. Everybody's got to have that. This is out at Meredith's farm, Granite Springs farm from our project plot. So big stands of it mixed with bee balm. Another one is the Rudbeckias, black-eyed Susan. There's many different species of Rudbeckia. We looked at Herta. It will seed in, pretty readily. Nesting resource. And I also love it because it's a favorite hangout spot for my beloved green-link spiders. But you'll see lots of visitors. Look at all the pollen on that one there. And then we're moving into Coreopsis, many different species native of that as well. We chose Coreopsis verticillata, which is the world tick seed, WHORLED. It's a more, little lower growing plant, very, very drought tolerant, and also very tolerant of heat. More pictures, American Lady. Here's a mixture of it with the wild petunia and the gaillardia. Don't forget, I know we're going kind of fast, but y'all are going to get this recording. Boneset is a good one. This is a relative of one of my favorites, Joe Pye weed, Eupatorium. And it would like some moist soil, but it does fine without it. Very long blooming. Very, very tiny flowers. It'll bloom through fall, and it is also great for cavity nesting bees. Attracts many different critters. You got the tachinid fly. That's one of our parasitoids. They'll lay eggs on an insect. They're not injecting them in it typically, but and then here's our largest assassin bug on the right is the wheel bug, and it's feeding on a soldier beetle. The solidagos, you got to have goldenrods, and we chose rough goldenrod, Solidago rugosa. But there's many different species that do very well. This is a real spreader. Just keep that in mind. It's pretty easy to pull out and plant somewhere else if it goes where you don't want it to go. But get lots of visitors there. Also a good nesting resource. I think I snuck a couple of other species of goldenrod in here. They mix and mingle, but you see the visitors, lady beetles, bumblebees, the golden rain, a digger wasp. This is a solitary wasp. I also love wasp. Most people are afraid of social wasps. I think all wasps are scary, but this is one that collects orthopterans, the katydids, grasshoppers, and crickets, and nest in the ground and feeds them and lays the egg on them. So their larvae consume those. Finishing up here with the fall blooming plants. Blazing star, another top 10. If I had to do it, I have several species of blazing star, but most species of Liatris bloom in the spring and summer. This is a fall bloomer, Liatris squarulosa, Appalachian blazing star. That's it mixed with some Chrysopsis or Maryland golden aster with the yellow blooms. I'll have bumblebees in the garden all the way through November, and so I like that it has a late bloom. And then here on the left is a silver-spotted skipper. The picture on the right is actually Lytra scariosa, but just it blooms at the same time, about the same time as the Appalachian, and there's a monarch there, just covered in them. Another great plant, another Monarda, the third Monarda on our list. This is spotted bee balm, also called Eastern horse mint. Beautiful flower. It's got these kind of leopard spot and lavender mix. Also deer resistant. Any Monarda is going to be deer resistant. It's a great hangout for green link spiders as well, and wasp love it. So here's a picture of the digger wasp. There's a spider just hiding out, perfectly camouflaged, and then of course you'll see the bees on it. Again, many different species of aster. And the neat thing so when I find a plant that's highly attractive to pollinators, because just because something blooms doesn't mean it's going to get a lot of pollinators. But if I find one, then I'll have multiple species of it. And for example, the asters I have in the garden, some of them like part shade, some like full sun. They have different growth habits. Some are mounding, some are airy and tall. And the size of the flowers and the color of the flowers differ. So that's how you really extend the bloom season, by having all those different species. This is big flower aster, Symphiatricum grandiflorum. You can see visitors. This is probably the Georgia aster, excuse me, but very, very similar, very large flower. Also, I have several species of ironweed out in the garden. They're all great. I will warn you, they can really spread. So that could be good, or if it's not good, just dig them up and plant them or give them away to someone else. But it's also a real workhorse, and it is a real pollinator party spot in the fall. They just are going to be all over it. So we'll see, sunflower bees, butterflies, all kinds of both bees and butterflies on that. And that's about all I have. Okay?
Okay, thanks y'all for sticking with us. We're covering a lot of ground very quickly, I know. I'm Becca, and now I'm going to go over how to lay out all those plants that Debbie just walked you through and how to incorporate them into your garden. So we wanted to develop design that would be really easy to replicate and easy for folks to just slot into their existing farm fields or along the edge of a farm field. So that's why this design might look really different than one that you might see in a fancy planting design book. We wanted something that would be really easy for farmers to just incorporate into their existing spaces. So we came up with this modular design that can be repeated and can be rearranged to fit into a variety of different shapes. So you can incorporate it into a field in a really long row, or make it into different shaped rectangles depending on the space that you have. And the design we came up with is made up of two separate blocks, an A block and a B block. And we did that because we, again, wanted this design to be as flexible as possible and as easy to make into shapes that would work for various different properties and different fields and landscapes. And so each of these blocks, the block A and the block B, are 46 feet long and 10 feet wide. And so that when they're placed together lengthwise, they're approximately 100 feet in length, which is often a common bed length for farmers. And that gives them a little wiggle room at either end as well. And then as I mentioned, these blocks are modular, so they can be planted either in one long line, as you see at the top there, or in those different rectangles to fit into whatever space is needed. And then each of these blocks, the A block and the B block, were then divided into 23 different sections that are, each of those smaller rectangles are 2 feet by 10 feet. And each of those smaller rectangles is planted with a different plant species from that plant list that Debbie just walked you all through and that is in your handout. And you do need to use both the A block and the B block at least once to incorporate all of the different plants that are in that recommended plant list that Debbie just walked through. So just to go into a little more detail about how we landed on this particular planting layout. So we first wanted to try to take plant height into account. So if you plant the tallest species, like the ironweed or the eupatorium, right next to one of the shortest species, you're going to run the risk of those taller plants shading out the shorter species. And so depending also on the orientation of your bed, of course. So you don't want, especially don't want to plant those short species on the north side of the taller ones, and then they'll get shaded out for most of the growing season and won't really thrive. So we tried to take that into account when we chose which plants to place next to each other in this layout that we provided you with. But do keep in mind that will also depend on how you lay out those blocks on your own property. So pay attention to how you're orienting these blocks in your own fields, because that will also affect which species might get shaded out by other ones. We also tried to place plants that spread more aggressively or more quickly next to ones that also grow really quickly or get established really quickly, so that they wouldn't overtake those plants that take a season or two to really get going and really get established. All of the plants that we selected for these trials, we selected in part because they are really tough, really resilient plants that can really handle a lot of the heat and humidity and drought once they're established, but some of them do grow faster than others and might just take over if given the opportunity. So we tried to place those more aggressive growers next to other aggressive growers so that they wouldn't outcompete some of the slower growers. And then also Debbie nodded to this in her presentation, but just keep in mind that this planting plan is not set in stone by any means. For example, some of the species are repeated more than others in our planting plan, and that's simply because of the reality on the ground. We just had more plugs or more seeds of certain species than others. So all of that to say, use this plant list and this planting plan as a starting point. It's not set in stone. These aren't the only plants. This isn't the only layout that would work, but this is a good starting point that you can then adapt based on your own space and then the plants that you also have available. And then finally, just to give you a better sense of the layout within those small 2x10 blocks, the plants are meant to be arranged in 2 staggered rows within those 2x10 blocks with 12 to 18-inch spacing. We recommend 12-inch spacing for pretty much all of the plants in that plant list, aside from the Baptisia and the Eupatorium. Those we recommend 18-inch spacing for, because those plants just get so big so quickly. And that is noted in that handout as well. And then these are a few pictures of some of the plant beds at Meredith's farm, Granite Springs Farm. The one with the flags is from our planting day. Since we had a lot of folks helping on the planting day with the planting design, we used flags to mark out placement of each plug just to make it easier to install it with a big group of people. And then as you can see from that bottom photo, that's Meredith's plant bed in May after the plants have been growing for a little while. And it just really illustrates how this planting design was really our best attempt to create a planting plan and a layout that imitates the way annual crops get planted in a farm bed typically, so that the layout could really work easily within existing irrigation systems and existing equipment on farms. So that's a quick and dirty overview of the plant design and the layout that we landed on for this project. And now I'm going to pass it off to Dan, I believe, to talk about where to get all of these plants that we've been talking about from.
Great. Hannah or Debbie back there, can you all hear me okay? Okay, great. Thanks, Becca. Next, we've got this grand plan and this scheme. I've been asked to say a few words about where to go to source these plants. And I guess I wanted to kind of frame this first by just saying, simply by creating habitat with some plants that are supporting pollinators, we're doing a lot of good work for your farms, for your crops, and for the planet. So that's a great foundation to build on. And then there are better and better ways to go about doing this by using native plants, as Debbie alluded to in her presentation. We're sort of leveraging the co-evolution of the plants and the pollinators that exist within an ecosystem together. Even better yet, because I'm here representing the North Carolina Botanical Garden, where we sort of we recognize that biodiversity and genetic diversity are super important because they confer resiliency to an ecosystem. Seed-grown crops are part of that great outcrossing experiment that happens in the wild. And by choosing seed-grown crops, we're taking advantage of the opportunity to support that genetic diversity. And then even best, the premium version of this would be using things that are of local ecotype. So we're selecting native plants, and we're selecting an ecotype that's representative of here, the Piedmont of North Carolina, not butterfly milkweed from the Great Plains. So that's a great sort of framework to start this. And then I think one of the things that's been mentioned in the earlier stages of the presentation is, there are a number of ways to go about installing these plants and getting them established in your plots and on your farms. Largely, you could do this, by sowing seed or by going with landscape plugs, which have been grown out in a nursery, and you're putting kind of a pre-established plug in the ground. There are some inherent pros and cons to each of these models, and so I want to daylight those here. Growing from seed is definitely the most cost economic model of doing this. Seed is, by the acre or by the square yard, a much less expensive way to go. Also, the availability of seed of these is much more reliable throughout the year, or consistent. The cons is that, as with growing any crop, you're going to get variable germination, and you're going to have kind of patchy or inconsistent establishment. Plugs represent the other side of that continuum. You're buying a plant that has been grown out in a controlled environment. You're paying a premium for that. But it is something that you can count on to establish more reliably, more consistently. So it's really not one size fits all. That might be the mantra of today's presentation. Different strokes for different folks. But there are two different ways to go about this. Now, where to go about finding this germplasm for these great pollinator supporting native plants? I'd pull up one great resource here. This is the North Carolina Native Plant Society's map, and they maintain this as a really great clearinghouse for where to go to find native plants. And a lot of the things that Becca and that Debbie and that Hannah have mentioned already, are available out in the trade. And this is a great map that's interactive, that you can, sort of dial in what nurseries are close to you and where you can find these. I will kind of front load this by saying this is a non-exhaustive list. Because of the philosophy of the North Carolina Native Plant Society, they have excluded from this list nurseries that also do trade in known invasive species. You can still find great pollinator supporting plants from those nurseries, but they won't be found on this list. But this is a great place to start and a springboard, into your journey into where to find native seed and where to find native plugs. And so from here, just kind of reflecting on the way we've stitched together these presentations, it's, this banner along the top of the page here. You've decided what species you want. You've done your layout and your calculations on the square footage and how many you need of each. It's time to go shopping, right? And you've got your list here on the left. This is on page 3 of the brochure that we handed out. You've got your shopping list here. And then you want to crosswalk that into the availability of an anonymized nursery here on the right, right? Simple. We've got it all laid out, except nothing ever really works out that way. We've got butterfly milkweed on our list, but they're sold out. We've got coneflower on our list, but they're sold out. But again, I want to reiterate the comments that Hannah made, that Debbie made, that Becca made. This is a serving suggestion. And there's a lot of good that can be accomplished by picking other plants in the same genus or other native plants that are flowering and do good for pollinators during that same time of year. So further down on this list, we've got Pycnanthemum tenuifolium, one of the ones that Debbie highlighted in her presentation. Not available, but you can find Pycnanthemum muticum. It's going to do a tremendous amount of good for the local pollinators. So run with what you have. Symphyotricum grandiflorum. If you were, one of the first 200 people here today, you got that as a wildflower of the year from the North Carolina Botanical Garden. If you were 201st, I'm sorry. You can still call us at the North Carolina Botanical Garden and get a Wildflower of the Year seed packet. But what if you need are hundreds or thousands of these? Lots of nurseries have availability of Symphiatricum oblongifolium, right? A totally solid alternative that you can use. So again, don't get hung up on this as an exact model. What do they say? Don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right? You can find a lot of perfectly serviceable substitutes out there. So what started out as like a linear process and a simple 1, 2, 3 ends up really being more of a cycle, right? You start thinking about the types of plants that you would like to have and how many of them you need, and you start looking at the availability, and then you make alterations and adjustments and substitutions, and it is a cyclical process. So if I had to offer one bit of wisdom based on years of trying to install gardens like this, is start early. Start thinking about this well in advance, and researching the availability of the nurseries nearest you to kind of see what they have now, what they're going to have 3 months from now, what they will have a year from now, because I think that can really sort of streamline the process for you.
All right. So before I dive in, a quick thanks to our amazing speakers so far, covering the research, plant sourcing, design, and species selection. They've done all the thinking. Now it's time to get our hands in the soil. I know it's later in the afternoon, and I'm not the loudest person in the room. I'm a little more on the calm side, so stick with me. So we started with the vision, the planning, the design, that this is going to look so amazing part, all right? But then we come to the part that matters, is getting it into the ground. So we're moving from bare soil to actual bloom, which takes more than good intentions. It takes a systematic approach, making sure every native plant has the structural support it needs to survive, establish, and actually function as a habitat long term. So basically, we all know that it's going to rely heavily on site preparation. So preparation isn't just a chore, it's the foundation that ensures your investment doesn't go to waste. So there are multiple approaches that you can take to like remove that vegetation. You can do herbicides, you can do tilling, you can be manual pulling, solarization, and more. Now, the choice of that vegetation removal literally depends on you and your situation. So if you want to solarize, solarize. If you just want to smother them, smother them. It's up to you. And for us, the main objective, the main goal was pretty much to clean the slate. So remove the weed seeds and turf so the plants do not have to compete for those resources. So this process requires time and careful scheduling. So it'll be the long-term benefit of a clean bed. The long-term benefit of a clean planting bed is invaluable. So as Dan mentioned and everybody else before me, picking your players is what's going to make it easy for you. So like Dan said, seeds are cheaper, yeah, but when you have a plug, it's so much easier. Where am I? They already have established roots. They provide immediate foothold in the soil, and it's just easier to figure out, okay, that's what it's gonna look like. That's the plant I know. So we targeted a fall planting window, which is specifically through like November, because the soil will remain warm while the air was cooled. And choosing those plants in the fall also reduces the plant stress and allows the roots to settle before the spring growth spurt. So if you chose to do it in the spring, I mean, you still can, but it will require so much more care and watering throughout the summer. Allow the roots to settle before the spring growth spurt. And also in terms of predictability, that's why we chose the plugs, is because you'll know exactly where those plants are. And you'll also make maintenance much easier, which is always the biggest thing that's going to be the most problematic for any farmer or anybody who has, or homeowner, is maintenance. So the hydration foundation, the watering window. So ideally, for like the initial phase, excuse me, ideally, it's perfect to use irrigation systems installed and tested before you're planting. For our farmers, they chose their specific irrigation system that worked for their particular setup. We just want to make sure that everyone knew the importance of irrigation for those plant beds. And if your plant bed is very, very dry, I would like pre-water, because I think Meredith pre-watered her bed before we planted in it because it was so dry. It was very, very dry in that October. And so it made it easier to dig in that soil and to get those plants in there. And when you're watering, you should literally focus on thorough saturation rather than shallow mists. So that was very vital to ensure that the habitat survived its first year of that establishment. And also for seasonal timing, which is important as well, provide irrigation for up to 1 year to ensure successful establishment, but also remember that supplemental watering is not required during the winter months. And we're not saying water every day. We're saying water as needed, but they do need watering for that first year. Roots to soil. So in my head, I created the term the Goldilocks depth. For the initial phase, I use the term Goldilocks depth, which is the plug should be planted level with the soil surface, not too deep to cause crown rot and not too shallow to expose the roots. So following the planting, we also applied a mulch shield of triple shredded mulch or leaf mold, which is leaf mulch, however you want to term it. So we utilize it as a weed insurance policy and a moisture lock as well. And then we also recommend, tagging each of your species during the installation if you need that extra assurance. This is a critical step if you're not confident in distinguishing your plant species in its basal rosette stage from a weed. Many native plants look like simple clusters of leaves in the spring, and these tags can ensure that the intentional plants weren't accidentally removed during maintenance. Right. So securing the roots. By moving from roots to soil through a systematic professional approach, we ensured that the habitat was built to endure. So the team successfully secured the roots to for the beds by focusing on those 3 non-negotiables, which is site preparation, precision through the Goldilocks planted depth, and planting by thinking critically about irrigation and mulching. And since Allie is not here, I am presenting hers on maintenance. So I'm just gonna keep rolling on through. So we aren't leaving behind a garden that needs constant rescue. We're trying to leave behind a resilient ecosystem. So by getting that groundwork right and securing those roots through site preparation, precision planning, we would have successfully protected that investment for the long haul. But we all know that even the most resilient systems requires a watchful eye to stay on track. Now that we got that foundation built, putting the plants in, we have to look at how we manage them as they grow. So let's talk about what it takes to sustain those. So maintaining your pollinator habitat requires intentional care, specifically through weeding, mulching, and irrigation. So for weeding, it's our first line of defense in protecting those resources of our habitat. It directly reduces the competition for opportunistic plants that are vying for the same nutrients and space as your intended species. If you follow a predictable planting design, you can use that to your advantage. It makes weeding much easier. You got your ID tag, you got your plant. It's like, oh, I know that plant is right there. I know that one. You don't need to be a plant detective for every sprout. If you know for a fact that you didn't plant any vines, but suddenly your plot looks like a scene from Jumanji, then congratulations, you have found a weed and you can confidently evict it. So while you start to recognize recurring weeds over time, you can always use the NC State online resource to identify those common weeds in your turf. But keep in mind that some of those species grow faster than others. So if it's left unmanaged, these aggressive plants can quickly outcompete your slow growers. And these are your different types of weeding. So, when it comes to the actual labor, hand weeding or scuffle hoeing is essential, and especially in those areas with bare soil. So the golden rule of weeding is to pull them before they go to seed, which we do a lot in botanical gardening, which I'm used to a lot. This is the most effective way to reduce future weed pressure in your plot. Another simple but effective strategy is to mow the area immediately surrounding your plot, because this is going to create a buffer that prevents those weed seeds from blowing in or dropping from nearby plants and turf into those managed habitats. Look at how we how adorable, so cute. So now we're going to look at how we protect that soil and manage moisture. So adding mulch annually is a game changer. It is not only adding organic matter, but it also retains moisture and significantly reduces your future weeding effort. For irrigation, the standard guideline is 1 inch of water per week, including rain, for the first year after planting. Once it's established, your habitat generally won't need supplemental water unless we are in drought. You can monitor those local conditions at the North Carolina Drought Management website, but also make sure you watch for signs of stress, such as wilting leaves or stems. And hand water and sprinklers are also effective if you don't have drip tape installed. However, be careful not to overwater, especially after rain or during the winter, as that excessive moisture is going to encourage fungi and root rot. And finally, we manage the long-term life cycle of the habitat. Most of your plants are perennials and will return after dormancy. If a plant dies unexpectedly, replace it quickly to maintain your design and prevent weeds from filling in that gap. You can also relocate your volunteers and then plant them and let them self-seed naturally to fill those holes elsewhere. For cleanup, while you can trim the aggressive self-seeders, this is Allie. She says, I would encourage you to leave seed heads intact to support birds and other wildlife. Wait until after that first frost to do any of that trimming. At that point, you can trim the stems back 18 to 24 inches. This leaves critical nesting habitat for those beneficial insects that Hannah mentioned, and for also the coming season. All right, enough from me. I've talked plenty and probably a little awkwardly, but that's okay. I'm just really excited, and I hope you all are too, to hear directly from our farmers and their experiences. At the end of the day, there's nothing that beats real hands-on insight from people who are out in the field doing this work every day, just like you all. Thank you.
While she's getting ready, I want to introduce someone who's become a dear friend, also a farmer I've worked with, Meredith Light, here in Chatham County, Grand Springs Farm. Meredith, I love working with her. She's always willing to do any research. She loves learning new things. She gets very passionate about stuff. So when I asked her about this project, she's like, yeah, sign me up. Before I let her start, want to make sure, as Hannah mentioned, we had 3 farmers that we work with, Chatham, Orange, and Robeson County. I have not seen Howard and Miller. Are y'all here? Okay. So you are representing the farmers.
Take it away, Mary. All right, good. Good afternoon. You can have more than 10 minutes if you want. So I'll talk slow. Oh, you got your slides here, remember? Okay, good. And just advance with the space bar there. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Well, a little bit about the site that we chose. We were allowed to choose wherever we wanted to have these, the installation. And so we placed our pollinator habitat inside a 10-foot tall deer fence. It's located within one of our garden plots that has been in annual vegetable production since we started farming in 2009. But the soil in this plot, it's improved over the years, but it's definitely not our best soil. Parts of it are pretty rocky, and the rocks are fairly small, and it would be almost impossible to remove them. So we had already been thinking about transitioning some of that plot into an orchard, and we thought that that would be a good place to put our permanent pollinator habitat. And last year we did indeed plant our first pawpaw trees into the plot right beside the pollinator installation. And we'll continue to slowly transition the rest of the plot from annual vegetables to fruit trees and some blueberries. The pollinator habitat runs right down the middle of the plot, and it's about 10 feet wide and 100 feet long, as you saw in the guideline for the A and B plots. Okay, let's see if I can make that advance. Yeah. So here we see some views from my tractor seat. These pictures were taken in May of 2024, before the pollinator habitat had been planted. We had a fairly strong stand of cereal rye that had been sowed the previous fall in 2023. And generally, we try to sow multi-species cover crops, but this one was just rye. Here you see that the crop is mature and it needs to be terminated. We wanted the debris from the rye to hang around on the surface as long as possible for mulch for the subsequent crops. So we decided to roller crimp it rather than mowing it with a flail mower. And you can see on the right where we start to crimp the crop, crimp it. In this situation, we sometimes would use a sickle bar mower to cut down the crop, leaving large pieces on the surface that would take a longer time to break down. But we've learned that roller crimping is actually a better option. However, we don't own a rather pricey roller crimper, but we do have this cultipacker over there on the right, that rusty looking homemade looking thing. It's super heavy. And what we normally use that for is to pull it over a freshly sowed cover crop, and it will force the seeds down into the soil so you get really good seed to soil contact. But we got the idea to try to do a little crimping with it. So using this implement to roll down the cover crop can have some challenges because it's not actually a roller crimper. If the crop isn't fairly mature, it can sometimes stand back up the next day after you roll it. Ask me how I know about that. And that probably happens because it's not crimped as well as an actual real roller crimper would crimp. So what we've done is we've learned to drag a silage tarp over the crimped crop to help it lie down flat and kill the crop. You'll see that coming up next here. In this slide, you can see what the crimped crop looks like. That's hard to say. Crimped crop looks like after a month under the silage tarp. On the left, we pulled the tarp back to expose the area where the habitat would be planted so that Hannah could place her bee bowls. She didn't talk about the bee bowls. I don't know if she will, but those little bowls were filled with, I guess, a soapy liquid, and they would attract pollinators, and then she would come back the next day and count them. But you can see her there doing that, and you can see the what the crop looks like after it has had the silage tarp over it. And then after she did that collection, and I think she did that monthly, we would pull the tarp back over that area for a few more weeks. Okay, the picture on the left was taken in mid-July of 2024. And you can see we came in with some landscape fabric and covered the rye debris, and then planted a late watermelon crop at the end of June. we like to do late watermelon plantings and cantaloupe plantings to go in our fall CSA bags and show up at market with melons when nobody else really has any anymore. And sometimes that works well. But the reason we put the fabric down, even though we had the rye mulch, is because I was concerned about some gaps that we had in the rye mulch that could have allowed the plot to get weedy. And that summer I had a lot of life happening to me, and I wanted to save myself from a potential weed problem. So we did come in with some landscape fabric on top of that. Then the picture on the right was taken in October after the melons were done and we had pulled them out. And they were really good, by the way. You can see that there's barely any rye debris left on the surface. It had all broken down, even though it was in really long, pieces. It had broken down over the course of the summer. And so now it was time to prep the bed for the pollinator habitat to be planted. A few notes. At our farm, we practice what we call reduced or thoughtful tillage. Certainly, we know that it's best to disturb the soil as little as possible to keep the fungal networks intact and to keep all the microbes and microarthropods and earthworms and all the soil dwellers happy. So we always want to avoid tillage as much as possible. But we've learned that being dogmatic about tilling doesn't always help us achieve our goals. There is a time and a place, in my opinion, for thoughtful tillage. What we needed to do was combine what had been two beds that were on 5-foot centers into one wide bed. And the way to achieve that was through tillage. And I did it by loosening the soil with a walk-behind BCS tiller. And then I raked the whole area into one 10-foot wide raised bed that was 100 feet long. We needed that wide bed for the habitat, to get the blocks in there. And we also needed it to be nice and fluffy to make the planting go quickly. The planting crew was going to be planting 2 habitats that day. After they did ours, they went over to Howard's place and did his. And I put down 5-gallon bucketfuls of vermicompost from our worm bin. We keep worms, that's our livestock. And they make fantastic vermicompost. And we only put down 5-gallon buckets full, which is just a tiny smattering of compost over the bed is 1,000 square feet. So you can hardly believe that it makes a difference, but we believe it does make a difference. And what the aim is there with the vermicompost is not to fertilize, but to add some more biology to the soil. I didn't put down any fertilizer at all. And I raked in the compost and added the 3 lines of drip irrigation. And as has been mentioned, it was super dry. I kind of hated to do the tillage when it was that dry, but that was the timing and we had to go with it. So I actually soaked that bed through the drip line for a number of hours the day before we were going to plant it, so that we could get it thoroughly wet. And back to the fertilizer thing, Debbie had assured me that the native plants would do just fine without much pampering. I was a little bit worried because I'm used to the sort of care that we need to give to produce annual vegetables. But Debbie was absolutely correct. I could not believe, in our case anyway, how easy it was to care for these plants, at least in year 1. So after the crew flagged the bed and planted, we mulched, and then we gave everybody another little drink of water. And the rest of that fall, and even the next year when the plantings took off, I barely watered at all. It was really astounding. I kept going out there and putting my hands under the mulch and also just observing the plants to see how they looked. And I probably only watered, I would say maybe a handful of times through the whole summer. They just looked great, and that mulch really kept the beds wet enough, and the plants took off. So this picture was taken the following year in late summer. And y'all, I could never have imagined how much I would love having this habitat on our farm. It's absolutely astounding. So we have plans to expand it into corners and nooks and anywhere we can add more habitat. Besides the beauty of the plot, it was always hopping with the pollinator activity. Somebody was always out there buzzing around. And so multiple times during the day, pretty much every day, I'd pop over there and just see who was buzzing around. He would say, where's Meredith? Where's Meredith? Well, probably standing out there seeing who was out buzzing around. I am thankful for the folks from the North Carolina Botanical Garden who grew out the seedlings and helped with the planting and the planting, and also to Debbie and to Hannah and her crew who did all of this research at the plot. And I hope I didn't annoy her and Joseph and Ollie and Bobby with all of my questions when they were out there collecting samples, because they would come out and do this cool research, catching everybody who was out fluttering around. And so I did pester them with some questions. And they were really gracious in answering me. And now I'm eagerly watching and waiting for the emergence of this year's plants and looking forward to the return of our pollinator friends. Thank you. Our pollinator friends. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me and on Zoom. Okay, great. Thank you, Meredith. You did not annoy us at all. We really loved coming to your farm. Thank you so much. Okay, and I want to thank one more time everyone for being here today. I know it was weird with the snow and we had to reschedule. I'm so happy all of you were still able to be here. We were missing some of our team because of the snow, so thank you for being able to make it here. And we are in the last round of information for you before the question time. So hopefully you're still holding in there. And Meredith, I think, gave a great transition. We're going to give some information about
so much.
what we saw on these farms all last year, how those plants established, what insects we found going there. So basically what you could expect if you followed our guidelines we talked about today on your own property, what you might see based on what we saw.
Our pollinator friends.
So again, just to recap, it's been
you.
a minute since maybe you've seen our list of species, our friends, but this is our A block and our B block. So on each farm, we planted. Great transition. We're going to give some information about.
Thank you so much.
You saw earlier from Becca that the exact layout of those blocks was a little different depending on what spots were available on each farm. We really tailored it to fit what they had available. So you should take that as inspiration.
Our
you can be
pollinator
creative,
friends.
find little nooks and crannies, like Meredith said, little corners that are open where you can just fit in a block A and then maybe you fit in a block B over here. It doesn't have to be an exact layout. Great transition. We're going to give some information
Thank
about.
you so much.
Okay, and then I wanted to walk through what we saw in our timeline for this planting. So we just talked about October 2023. That's when we got the plants in the ground. So think about a few months before that, there was already some site prep happening. Even before that, there was some, growing the plugs. So it didn't start in October 2023. That's just when we got it in the ground.
Thank you.
And you can see the plant plugs are there. They're pretty isolated. It looked pretty patchy still. We covered it with mulch. And then we let them make it
Great
through the winter.
transition. We're going to give some information
about.
Thank you so much.
Start collecting the data on this in May 2024. And from there, we did monthly visits. So May 2024, you can see lots of green vegetative growth. The plants are looking good. We saw who survived the winter. This is the time when you can make note of who did not survive the winter.
Our
you can
pollinator
see it's
friends.
still very isolated.
Thank you.
There will be weeds that are starting to come in. This is a really nice prepped bed.
Great transition. We're going to give some information
about.
Thank you so much.
Especially if you have the plants that you planted marked or flagged, to take out those unwanted weeds and plants that might be starting to creep in. Can make note of who did not. In June, you should start to see even more blooms, many more species coming into season.
Our pollinator
Hopefully
friends.
different shapes, colors, sizes of plants. It's
Thank
starting
you.
to fill in as well, so there's less room. There's still going to be weeds there, So keep an eye out, but there's less room available. Great transition. We're going to give some information about. Thank you so much. I think the computer is getting tired. Okay. And then we have July, so even more species coming into bloom. You can see lots of activity. You can make note of who did not survive. By August, we were seeing some species go out of season. So we mentioned this, you could be deadheading. These are perennials. They're not dead unless they're missing. When you see them missing, they're just done for the season. So don't transition. We're going to give some information about. Thank you so much. Their season, they've completed their growth cycle for the year, and we hope to see them back next year. And then September is when we saw those fall species come into bloom. You can see that there's whole new colors coming in. Make note of who did not. So that's why it's so important to have species that you know will bloom across all of those seasons, because those pollinators still need resources in September, even though most other plant species are going out of season. So this is kind of the timeline of what you could expect. Great transition. We're going to give some information about. Thank you so much. There's going to be highs and lows of blooms, different colors at different times of the year, and you should start seeing the plot really fill in, even just in the first year. And so you'll want to keep an eye on maintenance. By the end of the year, we already saw these plants sending up new shoots. So keep an eye on that. If there are those aggressive spreaders happening and you don't want that plant spreading, you will need to be monitoring across all of those months. By the end of the season, we definitely saw plants where we didn't plant them. Great transition. We're going to give some information about. Thank you so much. Collection. This was, there is a lot of extension. By the end of the make note of who did not. So we did also do research. So I want to give you a quick update on some of the research data we collected. We are still processing it because the field season ended at the end of last year and we're already at the beginning of this year. So I do have an incomplete data set to show you. You're actually seeing a sneak peek. I haven't shared this with another large group like this. Great transition. So, we're going to give some information about. Thank you so much. Just to give you an idea of what we're finding. So this is the sort of data sheet we took out to the field every month to all 3 sites. It's a lot going on. Basically, block A at the top, block B at the bottom, exactly like what you have on your sheet. Or actually for this example, it might be block A, block B, block A, block B. Just know that there's 2 block A's and 2 block B's. Complete data set to show you. All of the plant species, we have their abbreviations there. Each of those squares is an individual plant that we planted. Great transition. We're going to give some information about put in the ground. And every month we tried to track, did that plant plug survive? And what growth stage was it in? We had vegetative, budding, flowering, data set to show you where the bloom is spent and the plant is starting to go dormant, or was it dead or missing, actually missing? So this is the sort of data sheet that we filled out every month. And then now we're starting to look at what that means for the resources. So we really tracked each plug that we put in. So to orient you, this is May. I'm showing you all of those different plant species abbreviated along the bottom, the x-axis. The percentage of data set to show you species that was in all of those different growth stages on the y-axis. And the color key shows you the different growth stage that we were documenting. So each species has its own bar. And within the bar, it has how much of that species was in each growth stage. So we really tracked each plug that we put in stage. This is summarized for all 3 farms. So it's like a North Carolina summary. And right now we have May, June, and July processed. So we still have August and September to get through. Of each of those plant species that was in all of those different growth stages on the y-axis. And the color key shows you the different growth stage that we were documenting. Purple for flowers. So each species has its own bar, and within the bar it has how much of that species was in each growth stage. This is summarized for all 3 farms. So it's like a North Carolina summary. That there's a lot of vegetation. And right now we have May, June, and July processed. So we still have August and September to get through. But this is kind of a representation of how the habitat changed across the season. So we did have plants we had to replace. And the color key shows species. So just keep an eye when you plant them. That we're looking at purple for flowers. So, for example, so you can see all the different flowers coming in and out across all of the months. Had a snack. That was so we still have August. In other places, we talked about the orientation. 3 to 5 in bloom. So sometimes at any given it was oriented different on each of the 3 farms, and we were like, oh, that one is shading more than we expected it to. We did have plants we had to replace. Pay attention to orientation on your farm. So we did have replacements, even though we were doing this work. And we went through we're looking at purple for flowers. Some replacements. And when you do that, you just got to make sure for various reasons. So for example, in some places we had little in and out across all of the months. I also want to note that we still have August on perennials. That means our goal of 3 to 5 in bloom at any given time point. So this is Baptisia. We actually didn't get Baptisia that we're looking at purple for flowers. Why our May bloom was so low compared to what we were expecting. We should have more blooms in May for various reasons. So for example, in some data actually right now, because we're expecting the year places we had little to be quite different than the year 1. So I want to note that now across all of the months. You should think of this as a semi-permanent installment. I also want to note that because we focused on perennials, that means that the first year might not be their best year, right? So this is Baptisia. We actually didn't get Baptisia blooming in the first year. Probably why our May bloom was so low compared to what we were expecting. We should have more blooms in May. So we're trying to work out getting a second year of data actually right now because we're expecting the year 2 of these perennials to be quite different than the year 1. So I want to note that it's going to be you should think of this as a semi-permanent installment on your land, multiple years for these plants. Those are colors and they're painted with paint that we know has that kind of extend so low compared to what we were expecting. We should have more blooms in May. They are filled with so we're trying to work out getting a second year of data actually right now because we're expecting the year 2 of these perennials to be 24 hours every month at all 3 farms so that permanent installment on your land. Multiple years for these plants. We had a team that came out and did hand netting collections. So we went out with hand nets and we collected insects that we saw visiting each of those flower species so that we could connect a specific insect species to a specific flower species and we can tell you so we're trying to work out getting a second year of data actually right now because and so each of those insects that we collected went into their own little collection tube so that we could identify them under the microscope. Many of these species you cannot identify unless they're in the lab under the microscope. So we did that, like I said, every month from May to September. We put out the and we can tell you. So we're trying to work out collection, kind of like what is the status quo of this area before we put out habitat. We did that in 2024. So we did May through September 2024 when it was just grassy. Now getting a second year of data actually right now because after we installed the habitat, we again went back to get our post-installation measure and we used Beebles again May to September. Because there were now flowers in this area, we were able to do the second sampling collection, the netting. But that only should have more in 2025 because that's when there were flowers there. Okay. So to give you an idea of the diversity we can tell you, so we're trying to work out. These photos were taken from the habitat that we planted across the 3 farms. And you might recognize a lot of the insect species that we talked about at the very beginning. So we had quite a diversity of different bees getting a second year of data actually right now because honeybees, who knows where they came from, they can travel quite far. Sweat bees, green sweat bees, longhorn and sunflower bees, and leafcutter bees. That kind of extends. We had many different types of flies that we talked about in this habitat. Lots of different moths and butterflies. We did see some immatures of these butterflies and we did see monarchs there, so that was really exciting. Lots of different moths and quite a diversity of different bee species. We had bumblebees. We are happy to see that. That means there's lots of different data actually right now because they are being supported by this habitat just like we were hoping they would be. Okay, to show you some of the data of the insects. So on the bottom, I have those different insect types that we talked about on the x-axis. And the number of individuals that we categorized into each of those insect types are on the y-axis. Then we have the sampling methods that I told you about. So in the dark gray, we have the data from 2024. Quite a diversity of different bee species. We had bumblebee bee bowls, those painted cups. The second actually right now because insect types that is a light gray and a medium gray together is the 2025 data. And I split it into two because we had the 2 sampling collection methods. And the number of individuals that we categorized into each of those insect types are on the y-axis. And then the medium then we have the sampling methods that I told you about. So in the dark gray, we have the data from 2024. Hopefully that made sense. I can go into more detail during the questions if we want. So I want to highlight some of the findings that I thought was interesting. So first, you can see the increase in bees that we saw between 2024 to 2025. So that is great. We're already seeing a benefit in 1 year nets that we use to installing this habitat in this area. So that was exciting. And then the medium gray. I do want to note though that other insects groups. Then we have the sampling methods that I told you about. So in the dark gray, we have the data from 2024. I will note that doesn't mean that there were less flies. We were focused on bees.
Categorized into
I do a
each
lot
of those-
bee research, so we did have a specific focus on bees. We collected non-bees, but it could be a sampling bias. The other thing that happens, we know this with those
Then we have the
beetles, is
sampling
because they are
methods that I told
colored,
you about.
That means they're competing with flowers.
So in the
for
dark
interest
gray,
from
we have
these
the
insects, and the insects are deciding, do I
I
go to
will
this
note that
flower
doesn't-
that has resources, or do I go to this painted thing? So it's a known thing that when bee bowls are next to really great flower resources, they
focused
collect
on bees.
less insects. So I'm gonna have to handle that when I go more into data analysis and figure out how to account for that to really understand what's happening with these other insect groups. But I think it's very promising that we saw an increase in the bees. I also want to note that when we're just looking at numbers,
I
that
do a
tells
lot of
us
bee
one
research,
story,
so
but I
we
did
did
have
have
a
a
specific
specific
focus on bees. We
preserve
collected
diversity
non-bees,
of
but
insects,
it
right?
could be a sampling
So I
bias.
really quickly
The other
counted
thing
up
that
the different
happens, we
kinds
know
of
this
bees
with
that
those
we
bee
found.
bowls, is
In
because they are
2024, we had
colored.
9 different
That means they're
genera,
competing
so,
with flowers for
scientific name is
interest
a
from
genus
these
and a
insects, and
species.
the
I
insects
just
are
looked at the
deciding, do I
genus
go
for
to
now. I
this
haven't done
flower
the
that has
species.
resources, or
And in
do I go to
2025,
this
we had
painted
20.
thing?
So we
So
more
it's a
than
known
doubled
thing
the
that when bee
diversity
bowls
of
are
bees
next
that we
to really
found.
great
So
flower
there's more to this
resources, they
story
collect
that I will dig
less
into,
insects.
other than just
So
an
I'm gonna
increase in
have to
number, we
handle
had an
that when
increase
I
in
go
diversity.
more
So
into
that
data
is really,
analysis and
really
figure out how
exciting.
to account for that to really
So I'm gonna
understand
dive
what's
into
happening
each of
with
these
these other insect groups.
in more
But I
depth.
think it's
I'm
very
showing you bees as an example of like the next step of data analysis I would do.
So
So now
resources,
instead of
or
looking at
do I go
insect
to this
groups, on the
painted thing?
x-axis, we have the different months
So it's
that we
a known
collected
thing
data
that when
in,
bee bowls
May
are
through
next to
September.
really
Same
great
thing
flower
on the Y, the
resources, they
number of
collect
individuals.
less.
And I want to show you that the different months, we had different numbers of bees that we collected.
Other than just an
We
increase in
had
number, we found an increase
in June between 24 to
in
25.
diversity. So that is really, really
But look
exciting.
at September. So that's a really tough year.
So I'm
for
going to
bees.
dive
A
into
lot
each of these
a lot of the plants
insect
are going
groups in more
dormant for the
depth.
year.
I'm showing
And
you
we had
bees
a
as an
huge
example of
increase
like
in
the next
September
step
for
of data
bees
analysis I would
between
do.
2024
So
and
now instead of
2025.
looking
So
at
that is
insect
telling
groups
me
on
that
the
this could be a
x-axis, we
really
have
important
the
fall
different months
resource
that we
for these
collected data
pollinators.
in.
We really want to make sure that we're having blooms during that time of year. I want to highlight again that we had a decrease
Different
in
months,
some
we had
months, but I
different
think
numbers
that
of bees that we
beetle could
collected.
be the issue
We
here,
had
where
increase
really
in June
great blooms in July and August. That is probably peak activity in this habitat.
and
And so it
diversity.
could
So
just
that
be that
is
they
really,
weren't
really
interested in
exciting.
going to those bee bowls. So
I'm going
more
to dive
to
into
look
each
at,
of these
in terms of
insect
the
groups
data,
in more
but just so
depth.
you can get a
I'm
sense
showing
that
you
we
bees
did
as an
see some
example of like
immediate differences in the data that I think are really exciting. But either way, we do know that these insects are there in the landscape. They came to the habitat immediately.
and diversity.
And we know
so
that
that
these
is
plants are providing resources.
and so it
to
could
them.
just be that they weren't
really exciting that within
really,
1
really
year of planting
exciting.
this habitat, we are providing
So I'm-
resources back to these really important insects.
I'm going to
So
dive
you
into
can
each
see
of these
immediate benefits after putting it there. The other thing I want to
to
know is
look
that
at
depending on your exact
insect
location,
groups
the
in more
exact
depth.
insects
I'm
and the
showing you
species
bees
that
as
are
an
there that
example
you
of like
see will be different. So for example, one site had a ton of sunflower
and so it could just be
bees.
that they
The
weren't
other site had a ton of bumblebees.
really,
It
really
just depends
exciting.
on what else is in the landscape,
So-
your exact location. So what you find might be slightly different, and that's okay.
I'm gonna dive
because,
into each of these-
Everywhere is different, and that's fine.
You
But
could
as
see
long as we're
immediate
providing resources to these important organisms, that
to
is the
look
biggest
at
part.
Okay,
is that
and
depending
with
on your
that-
exact, we are adding a few minutes to our question
insect
section
groups in
actually,
more
since
depth.
we were missing
I'm
some
showing
of our
you
team members.
bees as
So
an example
now-
of like
oh yeah, sorry.
and so it could just
Okay,
be that they
we're
weren't
gonna see how this goes. It's a really
insect
large
groups
room,
in more depth.
so
I'm
we are
showing
gonna
you
give it a go. But we're
bees
gonna
as an
have
example of
all
like
of the different speakers. And Meredith, if you're willing, I'm calling you out. That would be amazing. I'm sure people will have questions for you. All of our speakers will be up here. You feel free to ask a question to any of us, and we will hopefully hear you with projection. If we have
And
an
so it
issue,
could
we
just
can
be
try
that
to
they
figure out
weren't-
a microphone situation. And then everyone, we need to remember to repeat on Zoom.
insect
I saw a
groups in
hand
more
really
depth.
quickly, yeah.
I'm showing you bees as an example of like hopefully hear you.
Question. So I'll repeat.
And so
for
it could just
Zoom.
be that they weren't
So the question is,
microphone
we
situation,
are manipulating
and then
the
everyone,
ground
we need
do
to
this
remember
work,
to
and
repeat
how do
on
we make
Zoom.
sure we're protecting all of
Okay,
those
I saw a
ground
hand
bees that
really
we talked
quickly.
about?
Yeah.
So the best way is catching them when they're active, and that's probably not a satisfying answer. There's a lot of bees that nest in the ground that are early season bees. So actually probably starting about now, definitely through March.
maybe you've seen the huge masses of nest entrances like that
Okay, that
picture
is
that
a good
Debbie
question.
showed. Those are going to be there for maybe a couple weeks, and then
And
those
then
nests are no
everyone,
longer
we need to
active. And there's
remember to
different
repeat on
species
Zoom.
that are active throughout
Okay,
the spring.
I saw a hand
So
really quickly.
once
Yeah.
those nests are active, I actually can't tell you a good way to know that they're there. So now would be a good time to check out
So
the
actually
area that
probably
you think
start-
you're going to put your habitat maybe through March. If you're not seeing activity of those ground nesting bees there, it's very likely that that's okay. I'll also
Okay,
tell
that
you
is a
that
good
these
question.
species, like there's a lot we don't know about them. We're learning more and more. Some of them can nest pretty shallow.
And then
but there's
everyone,
many
we need
that
to
nest
remember
a
to
foot
repeat
or
on Zoom.
deeper. So hopefully when you're preparing this
Throughout the
habitat, you're
spring.
not
So
digging 2
once
feet
those
into your
nests are
soil.
active, I actually
So
can't tell you a
even
good
if
way
you're
to know that they're
disturbing the
there.
top
So
layer of
now
the
would be-
soil, the nests below
and
could
then
still be
everyone,
intact
we
and
need
it could
to
be
remember
fine.
to repeat on Zoom.
So
Deeper.
the best I can tell
So
you is
hopefully when
observe
you're
the
preparing
area
this
as best you
habitat, you're
can,
not
give it your
digging
best
2
go,
feet
and
into your
we're all gonna
soil.
learn
If
and
I
do our
actually
best.
can't tell you a
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I mean,
good way to know that they're
you would
there.
have seen the activity, the little mounds
Layer of the soil
they excavate, you know, the different ground nesting bee species.
could still
they
be
do
intact
nest
and
at
it could
different
be
times
fine.
of the year. But at some point in that year, you would have seen those mounds, which
Read
do
on
go
Zoom.
away after 2 to
Deeper.
4 weeks.
So hopefully
And then you can't see them. But
when
as
you're
long as you're familiar
preparing
with
this
the property,
habitat,
you
you're
would have
not
seen
digging
usually
2
quite
feet
a
into your
collection or
soil.
aggregate
If
of
I
those-
actually
those,
can't tell you a
mounds to know that they're under there.
good way to know that they're there. Yes. Layer of the soil could still be intact and it
Well, that's good. Let me repeat it really quick. So in each of the planting blocks, there's 2-foot
4
spaces for
weeks.
each of the plants.
And then you
How
can't see
many
them, but as
plants,
long as
like
you're familiar with your
plant
property,
plugs
you
habitat,
of
you're
each
not
species
digging
are we
2
putting
feet into your
this?
soil. If I actually can't tell you a
I am not good at math on the spot.
good way
so
to know
I'm
that they're there.
Drawing out, but if, so each of those blocks was 2 by 10. So
Layer of the
20
soil
Square feet, and if we're doing a foot.
could still be
spacing,
intact and
that
it
is 40 plants. Roughly, but in practice, it ends up not quite being
4
that. Like,
weeks.
in Meredith,
And then you can't see
on
them, but as long as you're familiar with your property, you
Habitat, you're not
half that,
digging
'cause some
2
of the beds lost
feet
like
into
10
your soil.
shoulders and
If
things
I
like
actually
that.
can't tell you
So
a
it's, yeah, so up to 20 per plot, but the spacing is the most important. So I need to like draw it out, but if, so each of those into that.
layer
So
of
for
the
the
soil
2 species that we used 18-inch spacing,
could still be
I believe
intact
we
and
had
it
5 per section of those species, and we did a row of 3, a row of 2 to stagger it.
20 per
For the other
plot,
species,
but
we did maybe
but the-
2 rows of 4 or 2 rows of 5. But I think depending
I
on
need to,
your
like,
area,
draw
when you map it out, just see how much fits. Giving the 12-inch spacing or the
It's all
18-inch
20
spacing
plants into
is,
that.
we prioritize
So
that
for
over
the
the
2
exact
species that we
number
used
that we fit in there, so the
18-inch
plants had enough room
spacing,
to
I
grow.
believe we had
And I
5
know we had a lot of
per
discussion
section
about
of
that,
those
and
species.
in some cases, I'm like, eek, these are being planted really close together. It's a trade-off. So
I need to
in the
like draw
beginning, you can either plant closer together and have less weed issues throughout the year, or plant them wider apart, but you're gonna be spending more time weeding in those
all
gaps.
20
So,
plants into that.
you know, it's easy to divide plants as they mature, so.
That over
you
the
know,
exact
closer
number
spacing
that we fit in
did,
there, so the
you
plants
know,
had enough
Meredith
room
might
to.
remove some plants. She said a lot of
I
people
believe we
wanna
had 5
expand it, so
per
it's easy to, gives you plenty of plants to spread around the farm.
section of those species.
Another question about the blocks. What's the significance of A versus B?
Okay, the question is, what is the significance of the
All
A
20
block
plants
versus the
into
B
that.
block?
We just wanted to make it as flexible as possible.
You know,
So the
the
only
closer-
difference
Number
is
that we
each
fit in there, so
block
the
has
plants had
slightly
enough room
different,
to.
composition of plant species.
I believe we
in
had
it, to
5
make sure that
per
all those species that we recommended were covered in our
section of
design.
those
So
species.
that's the only difference between the two is block A is slightly different plant species than block B does. Use all 20 plants into that.
Yeah.
You know, the closer.
Number that we fit in there.
It's slightly different,
Okay, maybe we can pause at each part.
the only difference between the two is B does. Into that.
have Italian pies, and would you?
You know, at the closer.
Number that we fit in there.
It's slightly different,
Italian pies, so they would actually increase their competition with wild bees, because apparently they could really decimate wild bee populations. So if that's what we're after.
he does.
Okay, so the question was, did the farmers have honeybee hives? And what did we do about that? Because there's known competition between honeybees and
You know,
native bees.
at the closer.
Okay, I that we can fit in take there. a stab, and
Slightly
if anyone
different,
wants to follow up, that's fine. So the concern with honeybees versus some of our wild bee species is honeybee colonies can get rather large. There could be tens of
Yes.
thousands of individuals, and all of those individuals are collecting food. Where our native bees, because they're solitary, each nest could maybe only have a dozen
You know,
individuals,
at the
a
closer.
dozen eggs or so that are laid.
Number
So
that we
the
fit in
scale
there.
at which
Slightly
the
different,
resources in the landscape are being used between honeybees and wild bees is pretty different. So for these farms, they were small scale farms. The concern with honeybees versus honeybee colonies on their property on some of our wild bees, honeybee colonies can travel quite far, many miles, to find a good resource. So there will be honeybees
Yes.
around, even if you or your immediate neighbor are not using honeybee hives. The reason honeybee hives are still in the landscape is they're a very
at the
important
closer.
aspect of our agricultural
Number
system, where
that
we
we
have
fit in there.
large
It's
scale
slightly different,
plantings of the same kind of plant.
We're not
Many of our
putting
native
honeybee.
bees aren't good at pollinating that sort of landscape. It's a
Some of our
man-made
wild bees-
landscape. And so in sort of response, we need a man-made
Quite
solution
far,
to
many
that. We need
miles
have
to
those
find a
crops
good
pollinated.
resource.
That's what honeybees are really good at. When we're thinking
Yes.
about these urban settings where we're not talking about using honeybee colonies for crop pollination, the biggest thing is making sure there's habitat for everyone in
You know,
that
at the
landscape.
closer.
So that's a big component of
Number that we
putting
fit
these
in there.
flowers
It's
back into the
slightly different,
landscape. If there are enough resources
not
for those
putting
bees in
honeybee
that area, they should not be competing with each other. The issue
Some of
is
our
if we
wild
bring
bees-
10,000 people to a building and we don't give them
Quite
lunch,
far,
everyone's
many
gonna be
miles to
competing for
find
the
a good
food that we have
resource.
there. So as long as we're putting enough food to
Yes.
support the bees that are in an area, we shouldn't have to worry about competition. Thing is making sure there's
You know, at the closer.
number that we fit in there.
It's slightly different,
We're not putting honeybee. Some of our wild bees quite far, many miles to find a good resource.
he does.
Thing is making sure there's
You know, at the closer.
number that we fit in there.
It's slightly different,
We're not putting honeybee. Thing is making sure there's
You know, at the closer.
I'll just repeat the question. So the question quickly
That's
is
slightly different,
a concern for moths, and could these plantings be negatively
not putting
impacting
honeybee
moths? Do we need to be thinking about other resources that we add to the landscape to help support moths? And I'll let you.
Yeah, and so, we absolutely do that. We couldn't be planting, you know, keystone plants like oaks in this habitat.
Thing is
but
making
I
sure
can
there's
tell you that for the 20 years that I've been promoting pollinator habitat, I spend quite a bit of time talking about those keystone
at the
plants like
closer.
oaks that support, all of the caterpillars, which support the food web.
The
So we
impacting
do. The
moths.
oak trees,
Do we need to
were
be
not,
thinking
you
about
know,
other resources that we add to the
appropriate for
landscape to
this
help support
project.
moths?
But
And
yes,
I'll
I think
let
all
you.
of us here. Yeah, and so,
Does anyone want to add anything to that?
all of us here do promote, those very important keystone plants.
Yeah, just to
Those
follow
in
up,
this
we can't
habitat,
do
but I
everything
can
with
tell
one
you that
go.
for the 20
Right,
years that
this
I've
is
been
just a way to get
promoting
some plants
pollinator-
in the ground and help you if you're Other feeling resources intimidated. that we add.
uh,
Please feel free to go
appropriate
beyond what
for
we're
this
talking about
project.
today.
But
If there's
yes,
a
I think
specific
all of us-
situation on your property that you're worried
Yeah, and
about,
so,
or you have a specific interest, a specific species you really want to support, there's probably something that's a really good fit for that species that we can't generalize. We're trying to generalize here with our habitat to support as many different species at one time. So please go beyond what we're
oaks in
talking
this
about.
habitat, but I can tell you that
Let's go way in the back. We're gonna give it a try.
for the 20 years that I've been promoting pollinator,
Other resources that we add.
Appropriate for this project, but yes, I think all of this. Yeah, and so, folks in this habitat, but I can tell you that for the 20 years that I've been promoting pollinator.
Other resources that we add. Okay, thank you. To quickly repeat the question is, when we go to buy plant plugs, we may not know if there were pesticides that were applied. We do have concerns about systemic pesticides with pollinators, and is there a recommendation for handling this?
And yes, you're absolutely right. It's very important to know how those plants were raised, which is why I say support your local nurseries. And that way you can ask the grower themselves. I get all of my plants from my 17-year pollinator garden from local nurseries. The botanical garden is an excellent one. Rachel's Native Plants, Mellow Marsh Farm. You need to know your grower, just like we talk about with food. Buy local, know your farmer. That way you can ask them, right? Hold them accountable. Because absolutely, we've had some education that we've been doing with certain nurseries. You know, certainly it doesn't make sense for, like, I know some nurseries, I'm actually talking about Adams County now. You know, they if you go to buy an herb plant, they're going to treat that different than they would their other plants because they know people are consuming it. Well, they now know from everybody pushing back, well, it's the same way with these butterfly host plants. Treat them as basically human food, even though caterpillars are eating them. So you just have to know, you need to talk to your grower and know them. And we're very fortunate. I know y'all are not all from Chatham County, but we're very fortunate to have 3, sometimes 4 native plant nurseries here. So visit your native plant nurseries, ask them what they're using. Botanical garden,
Yeah, I mean, I would just kind of double down on what you said, Debbie, that, you know, there's been this proliferation of native plant growers in our region, and we're really fortunate for that. The botanical garden has been stumping this for 50 years, right? But we've seen over the last 10, just like this explosion in the native plant movement and a proliferation of nurseries. And I would say just get out there and start asking. You know, what are your growing?
So visit your native plant nurseries, ask them what they're using.
Just by
Botanical
the
garden,
conversation, we're sort of growers about the concerns and the considerations and maybe changing practices.
Yes.
I'm a farmer in SoCal. So I can see doing the block near our growing beds and being able to then maintain.
So visit your native plant nurseries, ask them what they're using.
But I also have noticed that
Botanical garden,
around my home and
Yeah, I mean,
farm and wanting to have things in a lot of different places. And my big problem there, well, maybe this is the problem, but my big problem there are wires.
Okay, to repeat, when we're thinking about putting this habitat in multiple locations
So
on the
visit your
property,
native plant nurseries,
particularly we're
ask them
talking
what they're
about
using.
nooks and crannies, but there are issues
Botanical
with
garden,
grasses, especially wiregrass. How can we handle that to help the success of the habitat?
yeah, I mean.
Well, I really want people to ask Meredith the questions. She's such a great grower. And she'd already talked earlier about how she plans to expand into those nooks and crannies. So I'm gonna let her talk about that.
Well, you know, I know we're all trying to get away from plastic use on our farms as much as possible, but.
So visit your native plant nurseries, ask them what they're
Like
using.
you have that Dinner Bell farm, and you replace that plastic presumably every 4 years. You have folded piles of plastic that you are always looking for other uses for. And by the way, if anyone is ever interested in plastic,
I'm gonna
use
let her talk
in
about
their yards to maybe kill grass or whatever to start a plot of their own, you could ask your local farmers if they haven't, because most of us
So visit your
really
native
want
plant
to
nurseries.
get rid of that stuff and see it reused and not in the landfill. But we fold level a lot of that up and put it in the corners of, hard to mow areas inside the fences and so forth. And so my intention is to do the planting in nooks and crannies there where that plastic has sat for years and hopefully not leach yucky stuff into the soil, but, that's what I'm gonna do.
So visit your native plant nursery.
Not have to deal with things like wiregrass. It needs to be something that I'm gonna follow through with and keep up with. So if I set myself up right from the beginning, then hopefully I can do the maintenance that's required.
So I'm gonna let her talk about that. I know some people have used pigs very successfully on wiregrass, they'll fence, like pasture pigs, but not everybody has those, so.
Yes.
My question is kind of.
So visit your native plant nursery.
And this may be, you can't do everything in this particular project, but when
Up with, so if I set myself up right from the beginning, then hopefully I can do the maintenance that's required.
I know some people have used pigs very successfully on wiregrass, they'll fence, like pasture pigs, but not everybody has those, so.
Yes.
To quickly
So visit
repeat,
your
the
native plant
question
nursery.
was about more long-term plants, shrubs, things like that, and how that can play
Up
into
with,
this
so if I
habitat.
set myself
Yeah,
up
and
right
I-
from
you've
the
worked
beginning,
with
then
the,
hopefully
Shrubs,
I can
I'm
do
thinking
the
more of like a
maintenance that's
hedgerow
required.
situation where they're typically.
I know some people have used pigs very
successfully on wiregrass, they'll fence, like pasture pigs, but not everybody has those. So.
That's an excellent hedgerow. Hedgerows can also involve native grasses and forbs, but they should be, definitely should be lower maintenance. And I know some people who even bush hog those
So
shrubs
visit your
every
native
once in
plant
a
nursery.
while to keep them, from going crazy, but yeah, shrubs can definitely be lower maintenance. We actually talked about that. I remember.
Up with, so if I set myself up right from the beginning, then hopefully
Could have done one
I
or the
can
other.
do
So
the maintenance
those are good
that's required.
choices. I know some people have used pigs very successfully on wiregrass, they'll fence, like pasture pigs, but not everybody has those, so.
Yes.
Yes.
So visit your native plant nursery.
To repeat the question, not everyone is a farmer.
with,
How
so
do we
if I set
remove
my-
lawn?
Yes.
My favorite way to do it is to, yes, mow it really, really low. And then put down cardboard, go to a dumpster somewhere. get a
visit your
bunch of
native plant nursery.
cardboard, flatten out the boxes, take the tape off, lay it all out as sheet mulch. Water it down, and then I'll add like 2 to 3 layers of like leaf mulch on top of that. And just let it sit for a few months, and then you can plant right into that. The grass underneath will have died.
Up with,
and
so if I
you've
set
added nutrients
Yes.
into the soil too. So that is my favorite way to deal with lawn. You don't have to turn it over or anything. It's the least backbreaking way I have found to do it.
I've done that method as well. Yes. Yes.
So visit your native plant nursery.
Have a large field, like say an acre, of wildflower seeds that you had planted, wouldn't it be a good idea at, around November, December, to help spread the seed and, pull weeds,
Yes.
maybe bush hog it, and leave like, say, a foot or so.
With lawn, you don't have to turn it over or anything. It's
Spread
the least
seed,
backbreaking way I have found to do it.
To,
I've
put more flowers and plants out and everything, and then also back to what some of the other people were saying about cutting down parks and stuff. I use fire.
used fire, yes.
Fire.
Okay.
Fire.
Turn it over or anything.
Tool that you had.
Okay, so to repeat, well, first I'll make a note that fire could also be a vegetative control method. But the question was about in the winter or late fall, how to manage some of this habitat, maybe bush hogging it back. I can start, I would normally go back to a slide that we had. There's so many slides I'm not going to, but it is in the recording.
Turn it
There was a
over or
little
anything.
QR code on the maintenance section when we talked about stems and leaving seeds for wildlife. So we do have research showing that if you wait until after first frost, but before last frost, and you cut these stems back, you can provide a lot more nesting habitat for our stem nesting insects. That includes
Um,
bees,
I-
it also includes solitary wasps and some other insects as
Right.
well. So
And-
if that is a goal of yours for this habitat, absolutely. And we do recommend cutting back 18 to 24 inches
Turn it
of
over or
stubble and
anything.
leaving it there. Not everyone, that is a goal for them. So I'm not going to say one way or another, but if you do that, we do know that that does provide a lot of nesting habitat. You could also maybe then use the rest of the plant as some mulch material in the habitat as well. And it could help control some
I-
of the plants. And I'll pause in case anyone else wants to add
Right.
to that. Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Turn it over or anything. Turn it over or anything.
Okay, the question was, we discussed planting, being particular where we planted taller growing plants so that they wouldn't shade out other species. And maybe we could provide some more detail about how we ordered the plants with that in mind.
Yeah, I think when we originally started, we did put the taller plants in the middle of the blocks and then worked out to the shortest, but then
Was we discussed
realized that doesn't
planting,
actually solve the
being
problem
particular where we
because it
planted
really-
taller
what
growing
actually
plants
matters
so
is
that they
how
wouldn't
you
shade
land
out
the
other
blocks in your
species.
own
And
landscape
maybe we could
and
provide
how
some
to
more
be
detail
oriented
about
in
how
your
we ordered the
landscape.
plants with that in mind.
So I would suggest.
Yeah, I think
referring
when
back
you
to,
originally
I know on
started,
Debbie's
we
slide,
did put the taller
she
plants
listed
in
the
the-
plant heights. So I would, yeah, I can't quite remember how we landed, to be honest, on the exact order that we did in the design that we offered, what actually matters, because then we planted it in that order at
Planting,
multiple farms, and through
being
that realized,
particular
like,
where we
oh, what
planted
actually
taller growing
matters
plants so that they
is how
wouldn't
it's
shade out other
oriented on this
species.
person's
And
land,
maybe we
not
could provide some more
this
detail about
diagram
how
that
we
we've
ordered the
created
plants with that in
we
mind.
think it takes into account.
Yeah, I
the
think when you
orientation and what
originally
we shade
started,
out
we
what.
did put.
So what actually matters is less following the exact order that we have laid out in the blocks and considering where north and south are in relationship to how you are laying them out on your land.
Yeah, just,
Really?
and just to follow up on that, so
being
when you're
particular where
thinking
we
about how
planted
you want to
taller-
orient the blocks, like kind of think of them as Lego pieces you can mix and match and put them together.
Is how it's
So if
oriented
how the
on
sun
this
goes
person's
on your
land, not
property makes
this
sense that
diagram
the
that
block
we've
is long
created
this
that
way,
we think
and that way the
takes
sun
into
is
account
going
the
over
block, the
everybody, great.
orientation
If
and
it
what
makes
will
sense
shade
that
out
it's
what.
the other way, that's
So what
fine
actually
too. So
matters
you might
is
notice
less
in the
following
handout, we
the
have
exact
a
order
layout where the
that we
blocks
have
are
laid out in
all
the
long
blocks.
on each other, and then we have one that's more of a square. So you can use different orientations of the block, rotate them around however it
Really?
makes sense for you so that they're all
Planting,
getting sun.
being
But
particular
also,
where we
like,
planted taller.
If you are looking at the plant information and you're looking at the layout and you're like, I don't know how this one plant
Is how it's
isn't going to
oriented
shade out
on this
another,
person's land.
you could think
not
about rearranging in
this
your own
diagram
way.
that
So
we've
use
created
this as a
that we
starting
think
point, but
takes into
we don't know
account the
everyone's
block, the
specific
orientation
situation,
and what
and
will
so
shade out what.
there's probably something that
So
makes
what
sense
actually
for you.
matters
You may
is
just need
less
to do a little
following
bit of
the exact
brainstorming.
order
But hopefully
that
this
we
is a
have laid
starting
out in the
point for you,
block.
so you don't feel like you're starting with nothing.
You could also hedge your bets a little bit, so in the rows of the blocks that
Really?
have taller species,
Planting,
you could increase the
being
spacing
particular where we planted
between
taller.
the next species.
Mhm.
Now, realizing that you might.
Is
that's
how it's
open ground.
oriented on this
So that
person's
could be some
land,
weeds, but
not
that could help put some
this
distance
diagram that
between
we've
shading on
created
adjacent
that we
plants.
think that takes into account the block, the orientation and what will shade out what. So what actually matters is less following the exact order that we have laid out in the blocks.
So the tall ones, the rounds, the passing in the shadow, primarily to the north. So if you're looking at the north,
Realize
Planting, being particular where we planted taller.
Yeah, it depends on what orientation you have the space for on your property. Some people may not be
is
able
how
to
it's
orient a certain way, so just whatever makes sense for you
put some
and
distance
just,
would decrease shading
you know,
on adjacent
make it
plants.
work in the space that you have available. Yes. Yes, that's fair. Yeah, it depends on what orientation you have the space for on your property. Some people may not be able to orient a certain way, so just whatever makes sense for you.
put some distance with decreased shading on adjacent plants.
Yeah, so to repeat the question was about the bee bowl data. It seems questionable. And what is that telling us? So it's an incomplete data set. I'll say right now, I do have more specimens to process, more data, and we are going to try to do a year 2. That's the hope now. And so that will give us even more information so we can understand this more. There is an issue with the sampling method.
Shading on
I'll just
adjacent
say
plants.
that. It's not necessarily that the bees aren't smart. The bee bowls are designed to do very well at collecting bees, and I can't say the same thing for all of those other insect groups. So maybe we only look at the bee bowl data to tell us about the bees, and then we have to use the netting data to tell us about the other insects. So I have a lot of work to do on my part to make this make sense to everyone. I wanted to give you a snapshot of we are seeing this and what you could expect to see on your property.
Shading on
But you're right,
adjacent
it's the problem is with the sampling method, and I need to understand what that's telling us. We do
Yeah,
have lots of data about bees in North Carolina that, and in some of the same areas where these farms are. So I do know generally what to expect, like what sort of bees we should collect in those areas. And so I think I'll be able to draw on other data from other projects to help inform, does this make sense, what we're seeing? And then generally speaking, bee bowls have been used like literally across the world. So I can also pull on that to help
Shading
make
on
sense of what's
adjacent
going on.
plants.
So there's just more work on my part.
And Hannah's a really smart cookie, so I have confidence.
Yeah, so okay, the question is, have I found rare insects in the habitat? Okay, or rare bees specifically that shouldn't be there that we're trying to protect.
Shading
So
on adjacent plants.
generally speaking, we have found a couple less common species. So I would say that it's because there is this habitat that, and we're picking species that we know do well supporting bees. And so it could be that they're already in the area, it's just now they're able to come to this resource that wasn't here before. There's nothing that I was concerned about seeing yet. And there's nothing that was super surprising. We are still in somewhat of an urban area, so it is going to be
Shading
more
on
general
adjacent plants.
species. We're also not planting any of those specialist flowers, like the example I used was the squash flower. I'm not expecting to find a squash bee. I'm not expecting to find a blueberry bee. We didn't plant those plants. So we're probably going to see more generalists than specialists. And right now, I'm just excited. There's nothing that I was concerned about. Makes you feel better. Somewhat of an urban area, so it is going to be more general species. We're also not planting any of those specialists. So there's nothing somewhat of an urban area, so it is going to Okay, to repeat the question, the question is about power lines could be a great place to install a meadow to support pollinators, but do we have concerns about that type of land use? There's nothing these pollinators.
I mean, I don't know about the electromagnetic
Somewhat of an
side, but
urban
I would
area.
be concerned about pesticide use because utility companies readily spray heavily in power cuts. Yeah.
And I'll follow up and say, I also am not aware of research where we're concerned about the power lines themselves. It is more about the maintenance, even just if they're mowing instead of spraying, that does remove. Okay, to repeat the question is about power lines could be a great place to install a meadow to support pollinators, but do we have concerns about that type of land use? With these pollinators. Species that do well because
I
there
mean,
used to
I
be
don't
a lot
know
of
about the
meadows in this area
electromagnetic
just
side,
naturally,
but
and
I
we
would
don't
be
have those
concerned about
anymore.
pesticide
And
use
the power
because
line
utility
areas are
companies
popping up
readily
as
spray
maybe
heavily
one of our
in
best
power cuts.
proxies
Yeah.
for what those old meadows.
And
And I'll follow up and say, I also am not aware of research where we're
resource for these pollinators, a really great area. We just need to work with maintenance, even just if they're mowing instead of spraying, that does remove some. To repeat the question is about power lines could be a great place to install a meadow to support pollinators, but do we have concerns about that type of land?
Yes, there was a
use
comment that
with these
solar
pollinators?
fields would have a similar.
I mean, I don't know
potential
about the
benefit,
electromagnetic
yes.
side, but I would be concerned about pesticide use because utility companies readily spray heavily.
Okay,
in
the question was,
contracts.
how do we get the results of the research when it's all said and done?
maintenance,
So
even just
this
if
is an
they're
ongoing
mowing instead of
project. We are
spraying,
going to
that
be
does
sending out
remove
some
some
updates. To repeat the
like
question,
the
the
first update is we're gonna be sending the
question is
recording for
about
this.
power lines.
I also
could be
have
a great
promised many
place to
people
install a
today,
meadow
so
to support
putting me on the
pollinators,
chopping
but
block,
do we have
that we
concerns
have a
about that
PDF
type
of
of
this
land
handout
use
that I will
with
get up
these
online
pollinators?
when we can do a post
I
about
mean,
the
I
fact
don't
that
know
this
about
workshop
the
happened.
electromagnetic
Our
side,
goal
but I would
is
be
to
concerned
update
about
this when we
pesticide
have
use
more
because
data, and so
utility
we would
companies
update
readily
this
spray
handout.
heavily
And
in
my
power
other hope, and I hope that these people are on the journey with me, is
If
that
they're
we
mowing
do
instead
make
of
it into
spraying,
a
that does
publication,
remove
like a
some. To
research
repeat the
publication,
question,
and we can share that. We know that all of you
question is
came to
about
this
power
workshop,
lines.
so-
Wording for this?
Yes.
I'm gonna go way, way in the back. Yes. Support pollinators, but do we have concerns about that type of land use with these pollinators?
I mean, I don't know about the electromagnetic side, but I would be concerned about pesticide use because utility companies readily spray heavily.
That type of land use with these pollinators.
I mean, I don't know about the electromagnetic side, but I would be concerned about pesticide use.
Okay, the question was about sharing this information with other extension offices. I'll let our extension agent start.
Oh, we love to share information, and, yes, when I have a big website called Growing Small Farms, and about half the counties subscribe to that, so anything I post there, they automatically get. And then I'll also share it with our agent listserv, and, just far and wide as I can, and other people will take it and share it, and, yeah, it'll get pretty, it'll get around.
And I'll add this handout. This was the debut of this handout. You're the first people outside of our project group to see it. And all we got done was getting it printed in time to bring to this workshop. So there's a lot left that we're gonna do to share it and make it available online,
About half
of
the
course.
counties subscribe to that, so anything I post there, they automatically get. And then I'll also share it with our agent listserv, and, just far and wide as I can, and other people will take it and share it, and, yeah, it'll get pretty, it'll get around.
And I'll add
Okay, the
this
question
handout. This
is,
was
did
the
these
debut of this
locations where we
handout.
installed
You're
the
the first
habitat
people
do
outside of
any
our
soil
project
test
group
or
to
any
see
soil
it.
amendment?
And all we got done was getting it printed in time to bring to this workshop. So there's a lot left that we're gonna do to share it and make it available online, of course.
And we're still planning on actually updating them.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, amending, yes, I did put out a little bit of vermicompost, but
Correct.
action for.
And I'll add this handout. This was the
Unfortunately,
debut
I
of this
also thought of
handout.
that
You're the
after.
first
Yeah, but maybe that's
people
just the
outside
next
of our project
we do
group to
is we
see it.
test before
And
after.
all we got done was getting it printed in time to bring to this workshop. So there's a lot left that we're gonna do to share it and make it available online, of course.
And we're still planning on actually updating them.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And I like to think that the difference in me.
And I'll add this handout. This was the debut of this handout. You're the first
Somehow also affects.
people outside of our project group to see it. And all we got done was getting it printed in time
I think it's way too early to tell, but I'm super excited.
to bring to this workshop. So there's a lot left that we're gonna do to share it and make it available online, of course.
And we're still planning on actually updating them.
Yes.
Yes. I noticed a difference in Marion. I mean, it brought her so much joy, to have that habitat there and, experience it.
And I'll add this handout. This was the debut of this handout. You're the first
species and
people outside of our project group to see it. And all we got done was getting it printed in time
That, I'm not gonna poo-poo that. I mean, farming is hard work.
So.
Online, of course.
Your quality of life as a farmer. And we're still planning on actually updating it a little.
Yes. And one last thought on
yes.
that before the next question. So this specific project, we didn't collect data on the impact to crops, but
Correct.
there's many other research projects that have looked at
And
adding
I'll add this
habitat in
handout.
whatever
This
way
was
they
the
did,
debut
and
of this
impact on
handout.
crops.
You're the first
And we see a lot of information
people outside of our
about
project group to
pollinator-dependent
see
crops.
it.
That makes
And
sense, right?
all
Like
we
fruits
got
and
done-
vegetables, we can see a difference, and people have measured yield before and after and shown a difference. I will say that I personally
Online,
have done
of course.
research on farms, not these farms,
And we're
other
still
farms
planning on
with
actually updating it a
soybean
little.
as an
Yes.
example of a
Yes.
pollinator independent crop, and we also saw benefits to yield from adding habitat. So there's a lot of research to be done. What research has already been done is really promising. We do see benefits in other farm settings, and I have no reason to think
And I'll
that
add this
farm setting would
handout.
be
This was
different.
the
We just
debut
did
of
not
this
collect that
handout.
data.
You're the first
Yes.
people outside of our project group to see
I
it.
just wanted to
And
follow
all
up.
we
Here's
got
a
done.
question about soil testing. I think it's a great practice. We, gain a lot from getting that sort of background information on the soils, but also our experience at the Botanical Garden has been that a lot of the native species that we grow and have been featured here, don't gain a competitive advantage by an overly enriched environment, right? Whereas the weeds most certainly will. Our plants are sort of involved in, to optimize native soil. So a little enrichment, particularly with composted leaves or vermicompost, can do some good at facilitating establishment, but overdoing it may actually kind of come at the flip side where you have proliferation of weeds, and it affects the maintenance and performance of these native plants that we're trying to get established. So just kind of a cautionary, everything in moderation.
And I had mentioned my demo pollinator garden, I have 235 species. It's the 17th year. We have never added any fertilizer. And that really does shock a lot of people. I mean, like Dan said, they just don't need it. I think 2 or 3 times in 17 years, I added a little bit of compost to the surface before we mulch. That's it.
Yes, in the far corner, we'll go. Yeah. Yes, okay, the question is, if you were an early arriver and you got a bonus seed bag, what is in there? I do have a paper at the back with a list of the species that are included in that. So see us before you leave and you can take a photo of it. And I can give you some more information. There's some planting guidelines for that specific seed mix from the resource I got it from. It's a local company in Eastern North Carolina that produces those seeds. So I will give you that information after. And if anyone else that got that didn't have that information, see me before you leave. Yes. The question was, we mentioned using mulch. Can we give more details on what kind of mulch we used?
We use triple shredded at Meredith's, triple shredded hardwood mulch. I often tell people, use what's available near you. That, because like people often ask me, where did you get your mulch? And they live like a county away. I said, it's irrelevant because you gotta pay for delivery. And you need to find out what's available near you if you're talking about any quantity that you would be getting delivered. I mean, I wouldn't use pine straw personally, but hardwood mulch, leaf mulch is even better if you can get it. But I also want to add that the soil in my pollinator garden is so poor, dead soil, hard pan, no earthworms, and adding that hardwood mulch every year, once a year, has just greatly improved the soil, along with all the mini species and their very diverse root systems. But some people are anti-mulch, mostly because, it interferes with ground nesting bee activity. On where I am in those clay soils and a parking lot, I could not have done that garden without it. But we leave plenty of areas for ground nesting bees.
Okay, the question was, of the 15 species we planted, some of them seem to have needed to be replaced more often. Any insights into why? Meredith, do you have thoughts on that? Okay.
Oh, yes, I was so sad that the Baptisia, just really got hit hard. We have a lot of, voles and moles. And so within the voles, right? So I've been given a pep talk to all of the hawks that we have. Because I don't know what to do about them, but that was one of the ones that we had to replant, and I'm really hoping they come back, because that's probably my favorite.
Yeah, other issues that could come up, we did have that shading issue, so careful with your orientation. That was a lesson learned on the ground, and that's also why we're saying it so many times. But also, like, make sure you water. That is big as they're getting established. And some of the farms had better or worse weed control, and that seemed to make a difference as well.
I guess I'd add, and some of it, there may be some variability depending on the time of year that you're doing the installation, because some species are more prone to damping off. Your butterfly milkweed, some of the grasses that we use as a habitat, nesting area, they may be more susceptible to that kind of die off in the first winter if they're not well established. So there can be some variability depending on what season.
The only thing I want to add to that is just, again, one more time, emphasize how important irrigation is that first year. When people tell me, oh, I'm so bummed, I planted, 15 perennials and only a couple of them came back, and I asked them about their watering, and they'll say, well, I planted in the spring and it was kind of hot, so I watered it a couple of times, and that's it. I'm like, well, what did you expect? So it is an investment that you make. You're trying to produce a robust root ball in that first year. You need to have a rain gauge at your farm or garden so you know how much water you get. If I don't get about an inch of water a week, I'm going to supplement with irrigation. And it's once a week, deep irrigation. Not every 3 days. That's only going to encourage shallow roots. It's got to go through that mulch first before it even hits the ground. So it's quite a thorough watering that once a week, depending on how dry and hot it's been. But if you make that investment in that first year, from planting till the next year, you should not have to water them. I don't water anything after that first year, very, very rarely. Unless it's really super, super dry, I might water like a water-loving, moisture-loving plant. Like once a year, I think I might water the button bush, take pity on it. But it really pays off if you invest that first year. Yeah. Because you're building that big root ball to withstand future droughts.
And over the last few years, I've tried to put various pollinator plants into it. The only thing, and then mow over it, the only thing that I had success with was bergamot. And I'm curious if any of the bergamot, any of the plants, and now it's spread all over the farm. It's beautiful. And I'm curious if there's anything else about this that might do well with that area.
So the question was about how to manage some of these species, with mowing being the management technique, and how these species might respond to that sort of management.
Well, I'm happy to talk to you about aggressive spreaders. I have a list of them. The solidago that we mentioned, the goldenrod, that's going to spread. Ironweed, some are spreading from underground rhizomes and some from seed. But I know all of. Yes, I can give you more examples that would do well in that situation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Yes. So, and that's a great point. We didn't point this out on the back of your handout. We do have some links that we thought might be helpful. One that was just highlighted was the plant toolbox. So if you're looking for a specific kind of plant, or you're interested in some of the characteristics of a plant species, we have a couple different resources that we think might be really helpful in the back of your handout. Yes. The question was, do pollinators have water requirements? Do you want to talk about what you do in your garden, Debbie?
Oh, well, yes, absolutely. And they use water, to drink. They, bumblebees would use water for their honey. They use it to make mud nests, for all those things. So it is important to provide water. I do it through bird bath, because they're very shallow. And they, the bees and whatnot are not going to drown. But, as far as mosquito control, you want to empty that every couple of days. There are many ways you can provide water. But yeah, it is important to provide water. You're absolutely right.
Another resource for those of us in Chatham County. Chatham County named Gardens just updated the garden for this area.
Okay, and there was a shout out for the Chatham County Gardeners Directory as a resource to use. I know, I know. Did I see a hand almost go up in the back? I'm gonna call you out. Okay. Yeah. Oh, Woo Master Gardeners. Yeah, that's a great resource. Yeah. Yes.
I'm all about the interested. If I can get away with it, sometimes I can't. And I have to try is leaving a stem sort of chopping and dropping and using the olive stems around the base of the plant. Is that as good as leaving a stem standing as it is better than nothing?
Okay, the question was about stem maintenance for supporting stem nesting insects. So I'll follow up on the research that I mentioned earlier. There is a QR code in the presentation to give you more information. We do have a write-up in more depth on the NC State Extension webpage, so you can read about it. Our concerns with cutting stems and then dropping them to the ground is that there's lots of issues that could pop up with moisture. So having like fungal or bacterial growth in these stem nests, we know is a problem for bees, and that can kill off the nest. So our big concern is moisture. Our second concern is they're just then on the ground for predators to have easy access to. So those are our two concerns with chopping and dropping. So I will say with chopping the stems, if you aren't able to do that, that is okay. These stem nesting bees exist without us. They find stems to nest in without us. So you don't have to provide the stem nesting materials in your garden if that's not something that's a goal for you. If you want to provide them, what we have found is chopping in between the frosts after the first frost, but before the last frost. We're doing that because we know that when the stems are intact, there's no insects that have had access to that stem. Once a stem is cut or damaged, there could be nests being built in those stems. So we know that we're providing stems in the period where those insects are dormant. So then when the spring starts up, they're ready there for all of those insects when they come out and are active. And so if you're able to do it in that window, it could be rather large, especially here in the Piedmont. You have many months to be able to do that. It doesn't have to be a particular time in those months. You could do that, or you could just leave the stems intact. You are then not providing an excess of nesting materials, but they can exist without us. Debbie, do you want to add to any of that? Okay.
I tend to wait. I don't do it like right after first frost because there are other reasons to have stems other than just for cavity nesting bees. For example, I don't like looking at a shorn landscape all winter. I also know that a lot of my favorite friends, like Argyrope spiders, they make their egg sacs in the nest or dried plants, and I don't. It's always a well, do I or don't I? Because when I tend to wait a little later. Like I haven't done it yet, so now we're going to start cutting things back. I do want to make sure I have cut stems for those. For early emerging, the mason bees are the earliest emerging cavity nesting bees, and that's usually early March. Am I right, Hannah? So I can't get all of our stems cut back by early March, even with my army of volunteers, but we aim to have many, and then we just kind of keep going. There's so much to do in the spring between all the winter weeds and the cutting back, but do the best you can, yeah, but anytime after first frost and last frost and first frost.
Yeah. And I'll add, I'll let you go, Dan. We haven't tried this, so I can't tell you that it definitely works with data, but it is something we've heard people do, and we're giving it to you as an option, is if you want to cut and remove the stems, some people have put them so they're upright in a well-draining container. That way you're avoiding the predator worry that we have, and you're avoiding the moisture worry that we have. I haven't tried that out, but it's something that people do. I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, a follow on and an opportunity to kind of shout out some other members of our team at the Botanical Garden who have been creating kind of artistic sculptures throughout the garden with some of the stems that they harvest earlier in the year. And this could look as simple as a wall fence or could have some sort of interesting geometry to it. But it's a way of keeping it in the landscape, but keeping it off the ground. Challenging to implement at a very large scale. Right, but if you're working in small patches and you've got the time, it's an interesting way to keep that material on hand.
The wattle fences are beautiful.
Yes. Yes, in the back. So the question was about cutting stems back. Yeah.
Yes, so Sundays tuberosa, she doesn't leave you much, stem wise, but, yeah, the other ones, we're gonna start doing them real soon. Yes, like I said, I wanna have some of them cut back, by early March. Because that's when, 18 to 24 inches, depending on the plant, because that's when the earliest emerging cavity nesting bees or stem nesting bees emerge. They will continue to emerge, throughout the spring and even later. So I want to have some options for them. Yeah.
And that recommendation, we created it so that you can be confident that when you're cutting a stem back, you're not damaging a nest. So you could cut at other times of the year. As long as it's still intact, you should be fairly confident there's not an active nest in there. The concern is that if you're cutting a stem that's broken or already cut at any time of the year, you could be damaging a nest that's inside and you just don't know. So that's where that recommendation of the timing comes into play.
Yeah, and just to be clear, once you cut a stem, that's it. You're not, like Hannah said, you're not gonna cut it again. I have a picture on my website showing, the stem of Coreopsis tripteris, the tall tick seed, and is showing the stems that were from last year next to this year's, or, the ones that haven't been cut yet, right? So I would never, don't go back to the ones you already cut. They could be about to emerge. Yeah, so it's easy, cut and leave it. And they'll naturally, the bee may or may not emerge if there's one in there, or they'll eventually just decay and fall over.
Yeah, yeah. You've been trying to ask a question, right? Yeah. Okay, yes. Okay. Right. Okay, so depending on the species, they could emerge at a different time. So let's think back to the life cycle that I showed where there's a female bee, she lays a bunch of eggs in a nest, and then those eggs develop. And depending on the species, it could change how long it takes. We know that the stem nesting bees develop in those stem nests over the winter. So that's what we're talking about. So in the winter, if there's an active nest, there could be, depending on the species, a larva, a pupa, or an adult bee that if you were to cut it at another time of the year, you could be cutting the larvae that are in there, you could be damaging the nest. And so what we're trying to do is give them nesting material so that they have a nest to safely develop in. The reason we're saying to cut in between the two frosts is because the adult bees are not active. They will not be laying eggs there. And so if you see a stem that's intact going into the winter, you know that no one was there putting a nest laying eggs in that stem. And so if you cut it, you can confidently cut it and not cut a larva in half, basically. If it's another time of year and a nest is damaged or broken, there could be an adult going in and out laying eggs. And so that time window, if you're only cutting back intact stems in the winter, insects are not active. And so you're protecting the nests when you do that. Did that clarify that? Okay. If they're already cut or damaged, I would not touch them again.
Yeah, so any stem that's already cut, don't do anything with it, yeah. And I'm gonna send y'all, when I send you the link to the evaluation tonight, a couple of articles, because I have one and Hannah and Elsa have one. That hopefully will clarify all that. But we know that is confusing.
It is.
People all over the country get very confused about the timing of cutting, yes, so hopefully that's between the two articles, it'll make more sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, no problem.
Did we wear y'all out?
Okay, it is 5:10.
Oh, gosh.
So maybe we'll call it a wrap. Thank you.
That's fine.
Excellent, excellent.
Thank you.
What was the seed pack that you gave